You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Dead up perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheap again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 18th part of What If Deku Finds Ben's Watch Ultimatrix. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of the incredible Muffin on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Mirko knew that she had never looked so pitiful. Her arm was broken in 6 places, her leg had a chunk of flesh missing, and her costume was completely red from all the blood she'd lost. Still, she couldn't stop smiling. Despite all the pain, she'd never had so much fun before. The 2 remaining Nomu were the most challenging. One sprouted long tendrils from his head and kept at a distance, while the female Nomu did her best to keep Mirko tied down in close quarters. Despite only being awake for a few minutes, their coordination was second only to their power. At least the other 3 were dead, and Mirko had done her job of keeping the monsters busy while Lemillion went after Garaki. As far as she was concerned, she was winning. "You're dying," the female Nomu hissed. Mirko shrugged with her one working arm. Heroes are expected to put their lives on the line. As long as the innocent are protected and the criminals are stopped, I don't mind giving up my life, especially if it means freaks like you are never made again. The tendril-headed Nomu growled and lashed out. Mirko jumped back, but with only one good leg, she couldn't completely avoid the attack. Half of her vision suddenly went dark as a lashing tendril slashed across her right eye. She managed one more hop back, but then the female Nomu was in front of her. Mirko felt a rib break as the Nomu punched her, and then even more pain when the monster's fist exploded with the force of a grenade. Like the other times this had happened, the Nomu's hand regenerated in seconds. Mirko staggered, and then collapsed. It was hard to breathe, and her skin had gone several shades lighter from all the blood she had lost. She could tell that unless she managed to stop the bleeding, she would die in minutes, at most. Well, at least my last fight was a good one, she thought. As if to prove her wrong, 2 things happened at once. First, a golden blur rocketed overhead to smash into the tendril-headed Nomu. Second, a column of flame struck the female Nomu in the back, turning half of her body into little more than charcoal. About damn time, she managed to gasp out. Endeavor knelt by her, examining her injuries with a practiced eye. "I'm going to have to cauterize the wounds. You'll live, but it will hurt. A lot." Mirko's response was her usual grin. "Promises, promises." Endeavor put his hands over the worst of her injuries and burned them shut with the skill of a master welder. Mirko passed out from the pain, but her smile remained. As far as she was concerned, she'd won. With Mirko saved, at least for the moment, Endeavor glanced over his shoulder at his newest opponent. "You abominations are all very persistent," the female Nomu hissed. "I will never stop. Not until I've slaughtered you all." Endeavor noticed how the Nomu's eyes darted around at the heroes streaming into the lab, until her gaze landed on Lemillion, who was fighting the remaining Nomu with one arm, while keeping a black whip-bound Garaki nearby with the other. "Master, Lemillion, get in the air, now," Endeavor shouted, even as he pursued the female Nomu on jets of fire. Without hesitation, Lemillion jumped to the ceiling, dragging Garaki with him. Once he was up there, he used float to stay suspended. Endeavor knew Lemillion had multiple quirks. The sheer variety of his abilities couldn't be explained by a single quirk, but his curiosity was shoved aside for the immediate situation. The female Nomu leaped into the air, but her outstretched arm was sliced off by Xless, a lesser-known hero who could shoot a powerful beam of energy from one eye. The Nomu shrieked, even as her arm regenerated, but it gave Lemillion a precious moment to reel himself and Garaki to safety with Black Whip. Now in the air, the Nomu couldn't avoid Endeavor's next attack. Flashfire Fist, Jet Burn. The intense column of heat incinerated the top half of the Nomu, and without her brain, her legs fell to the floor in a lifeless heap. The remaining Nomu roared in outrage, but his tendrils were blocked by Crust's shields. A moment later, attacks from a dozen other heroes shredded the monster to pieces. "All clear," Endeavor announced. "Crust, Eraser, get Mirko to the doctors outside. Lemillion, get Garaki to the police." Crust formed a stretcher-shaped shield in his hands, which Eraser had carefully placed Mirko onto. Of all the places she could get hurt, I suppose this was the best option. Eraser had raised an eyebrow as they carried her out of the lab. You want to tell her that. I'll be sure to put those words on your tombstone after she kills you. Endeavor was about to follow after them when Lemillion contacted him over the comms. Endeavor, Shigaraki Tamura was further in the lab. He's in some kind of pod, with lots of tubes injecting him with something, I'm not sure. He was unconscious, so he shouldn't be a problem to bring in. Today just keeps getting better, Endeavor mused, partly to himself. We've destroyed all the Nomu here, caught their creator, and now the leader of the PLF is helpless. If things continue as they are, we should have this whole mess cleaned up by the end of the day. My thoughts exactly. Hey, Lemillion, what happened? Sorry, Garaki just started laughing. I hate it when they laugh after they're caught. Endeavor frowned. Keep an eye on him. I'll send a team to apprehend Shigaraki. After a few curt orders to several other heroes, Endeavor started to investigate the lab. He was no scientist, but he was fairly certain that none of the biological samples he saw had been acquired legally or ethically. His skin crawled when he saw the ages of the donors on some of the labels. The youngest had been only 2 years old, and Endeavor could only hope that the child hadn't died to fuel Garaki's insanity. He was about to check another shelf when he spotted a faint green glow coming from underneath a crack in the cabinet. Curious, he managed to heave the cabinet out of the way, revealing a secret room behind it, where he found a computer. It was connected to a bank of small cylinders, each filled with a liquid that glowed a bright green. The screen showed a symbol he recognized, a white and green hourglass. Underneath the symbol were the words "synthesis complete" and a request to upload some data to a flash drive. Garaki must have had this computer on some automated task, Endeavor mused, even as he approved the computer's request and placed the flash drive in a compartment on his belt. I doubt any court in the world will fail to convict the bastard, but if we have even more evidence to bury him with, so much the better. Then he felt it, a sense of overwhelming dread and despair that passed through like a cold wind, so strong that he could almost see it. Only the sheer stubbornness of a man who had been pursuing a goal with single-minded determination kept him from falling to his knees. What the hell was that? Oh crap. Alien Queen's hand went over her mouth. Midori, what happened to your dad? Big Chill gently handed his father over to the paramedics in the rear before answering. I don't know. He didn't wake up, and he's hurt. Alien Queen wanted to give her twin a hug, but they were on a mission, and the last thing they could afford to do was give any potential enemies an easy target. He's gonna be okay, she said, doing everything in her power to sound confident. I hope so. Big Chill paused when he felt a rumble through the ground. What was that? A deafening roar shook the entire mountain, and the ground in front of the villa abruptly exploded upward. Nearby heroes and PLF soldiers alike were sent flying as an enormous arm pulled an even larger body out of the tunnel it had created. Gigantomachia roared again as he stepped out into the open, and brought a fist down on a handful of heroes. When he pulled back, all that was left was a red smear on the ground. A few more were incinerated by gouts of blue flame. Oh my god, Alien Queen breathed. It wasn't just the carnage that horrified her, but the cause of it. I know that guy. He almost killed me during middle school. Cellophane nervously swallowed. I think he got an upgrade since then. Big Chill's eyes narrowed. Dabi is on his back. Those two together could destroy this entire operation. As if to prove him wrong, Gigantomachia turned his head and sniffed the air like a bloodhound. He then whirled and took off running, trampling anyone that got in his way. Well, so much for that, Cellophane muttered. It's not over, Sir Night-Eye said as he jogged up to them. That was Gigantomachia, the former bodyguard of All for One. Hawk's intelligence suggested that he now serves Shigaraki just as loyally, but he was only supposed to move if Shigaraki himself commanded it. If he's on the move, then Shigaraki must also be active. Night-Eye's gaze followed after Gigantomachia. He's headed for Jaku City. Big Chill recalled what he had seen on the way to the villa. Wait, aren't there some cities between here and Jaku? Night-Eye's skin paled considerably. Gigantomachia won't stop until he reaches his master, and he'll destroy everything that gets in his way. I'll stop him, Deku said as he turned into Jetray. Night-Eye blinked. Wait, you can't. I'm coming with you, Alien Queen declared, and jumped onto Jetray's back. If that big freak is as dangerous as he looks, you won't be able to take on both him and Dabi. I'll put out his fire while you focus on the big guy. Are you sure? Jetray asked. Just hurry up before I remember how scared I am. I'll need to fly fast to get in front of them, Jetray said. Hold on tight. Jetray had only just begun to lift off when a crowd of PLF soldiers took advantage of the confusion Gigantomachia had caused to burst through the hero's perimeter. Some of them got fairly close, until strands of tape tripped them up. Get going, Cellophane shouted. We'll handle these guys. Night-Eye sighed. It seemed that decisions were being made without him, and things were moving too fast for him to come up with anything better. Very well. I'll send reinforcements as soon as we're done here. Jetray nodded and took off, with Alien Queen's startled squeak trailing behind. Night Eye sighed again, and then hurled one of his seals right between the eyes of a man charging him. Cellophane, I will secure the prisoners, he said. I want you to signal the other rearguard units to regroup around us, and then find Gale Force. I suspect that we will need his help very soon. Dabi noticed a shadow flicker past, and glanced up. He grinned when he saw a familiar flash of green light. Hey, Machia, looks like we've got a real fight on our hands. Human Gausaur, and then Ultimate Human Gausaur, crashed down in front of the charging behemoth. He reached out, grabbed Gigantomachia's wrists, and dug in his feet. Even with his incredible strength, Gigantomachia's own power and momentum slowly pushed him back. Not bad, Midoriya, Dabi called out, and aimed a flame-wreathed hand at him. Too bad you can't stop me. But I can. Dabi whirled and blindly fired off a jet of flame, but it was reduced to steam by a torrent of acid. Alien Queen hung onto one of Gigantomachia's spikes on his back with one hand, while the other was dripping with acid. Bad move, little girl, Dabi said with a grin. Probably, Alien Queen admitted, but I figured I'd make a few in my life. Well, this is gonna be your last. Alien Queen noticed how Dabi's fingers were already starting to char. Let's see if I can outlast him. I'm awake. I shouldn't be awake. It's too soon. How do I know that? Is it one of the quirks Garaki gave me? No, it's something else. I don't know what, but I should. I feel incomplete. It's definitely too soon. Something must have happened. The heroes must have attacked us. It has to be them. They're always in my way. It's too soon to fight, but I don't have a choice. This might be fun. Other than the feeling of overwhelming dread, the first warning Endeavor had that something had gone horribly wrong was a slight tremor in the ground. Every instinct, honed from decades of training and experience, told him that whatever was about to happen was beyond anything he could handle. Everyone out. He roared into his comms. All teams, get outside. Rather than run for the stairs, Endeavor unleashed a column of intense heat straight up. He knew there was nobody there. The only heroes were either in the lab with him, or outside the hospital with the evacuated civilians. He flew up from the thrust of the fire from his feet, straight through the hole and into the hospital's first floor. Other heroes were right behind him, either using their quirks to move quickly, or hitching a ride with someone who had that ability. Cracks began forming in the floor, spreading rapidly throughout the entire building. Endeavor knew he wasn't responsible, and from the way things were turning to dust, he could only think of one person with that kind of destructive power. How could Shigaraki's decay be this powerful? He thought. It's spreading too fast, and Endeavor heard a scream, and turned his head to see crust disintegrate before his eyes. He'd been trying to shield a few other heroes from the decay, but they all died in an agonizing instant. Shigaraki's quirk could only affect what he was touching with all 5 fingers, he thought with mounting horror. Did he go through an awakening? Can his power now spread to everything? This is Endeavor to all units, he said, fighting to keep his voice under control. This is a code red. I repeat, code red. Fall back from the hospital, and don't stop running until this attack stops. He could only hope that it did stop. The universe away, Azmuth heard an alarm start to blare in his lab. Even with his intellect, it took a moment for him to recognize it, simply because it had never gone off before. As soon as he remembered what it was, he felt true terror for perhaps the first time in his life. Eunice, he barked, and his assistant came running in. What's wrong? Eunice asked. Azmuth handed her a small tablet that grew to fit her hand. There's a list of equipment that I need immediately. As soon as you have it, we're going to Earth to pick up Ben. Eunice blinked. Boss, you're starting to scare me. What's going on? Azmuth didn't even try to hide his fear. Possibly the worst thing that could happen. Ultimate Human Gausaur grunted as Gigantomachia drove a fist into his chest. His armored plates took the worst of the hit, but it still hurt. At first, he'd thought Gigantomachia was some kind of super Nomu, but other than having multiple quirks, there were no other similarities. He could only assume that Gigantomachia had either been born with multiple quirks not impossible, but astronomically rare, or had been naturally strong enough for All for One to give him so many without risk. Deku knew he was strong enough to handle most villains on the planet, at least in terms of pure strength. But Gigantomachia was something else. His power was already close to Ultimate Human Gausaur, and he was only getting stronger and bigger, and were his fingers always giant claws. With a roar, Gigantomachia heaved him through a building. Metal twisted, glass shattered, and Ultimate Human Gausaur heard screams as civilians tried to escape the chaos. He's already pushed me to one of the cities, he thought in alarm. At this rate, we'll be at Jaku in no time at all. A familiar scream caught his attention, and he risked taking his eyes off of Gigantomachia to see Alien Queen ducking under a stream of blue fire. Her jacket caught fire, and she coated her entire body in acid to put it out, but not before getting a nasty burn on her shoulder. Dabi had his own burns. The skin on his hands was seared almost black, and there was a nasty mark on his leg that hadn't come from his own fire. Deku paid for his inattention when Gigantomachia slashed his arm. Ultimate Human Gausor's hide was tough, but the sheer power behind the blow cut deep into his flesh. He roared in pain and smashed Gigantomachia across the face with his uninjured arm. Jagged teeth flew ahead of a spurt of blood, but Gigantomachia kept pushing. If anything, he was probably only fighting because he just wanted Deku out of the way. Deku wasn't sure if he wanted to see what the fight would be like if Gigantomachia's goal was to kill him. Maybe Ultimate Human Gausor was the wrong call, he thought. I don't have enough time left for another ultimate, and I only have about 5 minutes left as it is. I'll have to either go to another alien or disengage until I get a full recharge. He knew the second option was unacceptable. There would potentially be thousands of victims if he simply let Gigantomachia be on his way. He had to stop Gigantomachia, or at least slow him down long enough for the civilians to be evacuated by the heroes. Wait, there aren't any heroes, he realized. Almost everyone was brought in for the operation. The police won't have anyone to buy time for the civilians to escape. Well, that settled it for him. He would just have to do what he could to slow Gigantomachia down, and try not to get killed in the process. As several deep furrows were carved in his chest plates, he knew that would be easier said than done. Genesis looked on in horror as Jaku Hospital crumbled into dust, followed by everything else within 8 blocks. Nearby buildings collapsed from the sudden change, cars swerved and crashed, and the roads cracked for miles around. Holy shit. If the situation hadn't been so terrible, Genesis might have been surprised that Ida had been the one to swear. What do we do? Froppy asked quietly. I don't know, Genesis admitted, and tried to get her mind working again. There might be survivors. We should get over there and do what we can to help. Good idea, Ponytail, Ground Zero muttered, and blasted himself into the air. At any other time, Genesis would have been pleasantly surprised that Bakugo had wholeheartedly agreed with her. The other students ran down the street towards the devastation. They could hear sirens and screams all around them, but they'd been taught to investigate the worst part of a situation first, and then work outward from there. Hey, kids. Ingenium darted out of an alley and ran alongside them, along with his newest sidekick. Okay, not really sure what the protocol for you guys is in this kind of nightmare, but just stay with me. All right. That is greatly appreciated, brother, Virtus said as he jogged next to Ingenium. Do you know what has happened? Not really, Ingenium admitted. All I know is that Endeavor ordered everyone to run out of the hospital, and then, well, you probably know what happened then. Triumph grimaced. As much as he hated his father for what he'd done, he couldn't bring himself to wish he was dead. At the very least, Japan's morale couldn't afford to lose 2 #1 heroes in 1 year. Part of him was happy to see Endeavor a moment later, pushing away some debris and helping other heroes to their feet. Another part of him was severely disappointed that he was unscathed. Endeavor. Ingenium sprinted over. How bad was it? Bad, Endeavor grunted. Crust is dead, and so are most of the heroes who went into the hospital. The only ones I can account for are Mirko and Lemillion, plus the heroes here. Ingenium was wearing his helmet, but it was obvious that he was as horrified as they all felt. Oh God, what about the civilians? The hospital staff? Endeavor looked around. Maybe some got out, but it's impossible to say right now. It's not like Shigaraki's quirk leaves evidence behind. Genesis heard gagging behind her and turned to see Earphone Jack on her knees, expelling the contents of her stomach. Grape Juice, who was closest, handed her a bottle of water. Screams, Earphone Jack gasped out after she'd washed out her mouth. I can hear so many screams. There are people under the debris, some of them are dying. Genesis fought to keep her own stomach in check. She tried not to think about it, but her mind had already started estimating the potential casualties. Even with the evacuations, the number was easily in the hundreds. We need to begin search and rescue efforts, Endeavor said. Ingenium, I'm placing you in charge of that. Take any rescue specialists and the students. I'll take any remaining fighters and go after Shigaraki. We can't afford to let him do something like this again. Oh, you're right about that. The voice made Genesis' skin crawl. She looked up and saw Shigaraki floating in the air. He had changed since the last time she'd seen him, with white hair and a black bodysuit that had segmented plates over his chest and legs. There was also no sign of any of his severed hands. He was far enough away that Genesis couldn't make out the details, but there was something else off about him, something about his eyes. Change of plans, Endeavor said quietly. Get the fighters here now. I'll hold him off as long as I can. Everyone else run. Heroes had already started gathering when Shigaraki had appeared. They should have felt more confident. Their numbers were growing by the moment, while Shigaraki was alone. However, something deep in their souls told them that they were vastly outmatched, and if the grin on Shigaraki's face was anything to go by, he knew it too. Well, Shigaraki spread his arms wide. Who wants to be first? Had things gone according to plan, the commanders within the HPSC would have been celebrating, or at least approaching the situation with cautious optimism. The threat posed by Shigaraki's army was the greatest Japan had faced since the early days of quirks, and this operation would finally tear out that threat at the root. But things weren't going according to plan. The staff should have been desperately trying to get things under control, and the commanders should have been on the phone with the very top of the HPSC to keep them informed. Instead, everyone was dead. The lucky ones were still in one piece when they died. The unluckiest were spread across several rooms. Is this as cathartic for you guys as it is for me? Slice asked, and shook blood free from her hair. Definitely, Chimera said, and dropped the body of a security guard that had tried to get in his way. The chance to put down the ones pulling the hero's strings. Most villains don't even have dreams this good. Speak for yourself. Compress gingerly stepped around some mangled remains. If I must kill, I prefer quick and clean operations, not wanton slaughter. Have you even killed anyone today? Slice asked. His role isn't to destroy the opposition, 9 cut in. His task is to deal with security. Fine, fine. Slice glanced to her right. You're awfully quiet, Toga. Toga glared at her. Jin is dead, and not in the mood. The other villains, including Redistro, gave Skeptic a look. The last thing he'd seen before security had cut out and the strike team had deployed was Hawks executing twice. For most of the League members that had hurt, not only had one of their most useful members died, but after he had started recovering from his trauma, they'd started to see him as a friend. Those were hard to come by for villains, and since they didn't know where Hawks was at the moment, they were taking their anger out on the HPSC. Halt, a security guard shouted. Stop where you are, moron. Slice sneered, and fired a tuft of hair that impaled the man through the eye. What, did he think we were gonna just roll over? The Commission's security tends to be of low intelligence, Skeptic said. They don't want their in-house muscle to get curious and poke around where they shouldn't. He typed away on his laptop for a moment, and frowned. I was right about their firewalls. Even when we're inside the building, I can't get their files. Then you'll do it the old-fashioned way, 9 said. Toga, Slice, Spinner, Kirigiri, escort Skeptic to the server room and keep him safe while he takes the files. Everyone else is with me. We're cutting the head off this snake. Once Skeptic's part of the team split off, the rest continued with the attack. With powerhouses like 9 and Chimera leading the charge, the security around the Commission's leadership didn't stand a chance. Normally, there would have been a few experienced heroes as a final line of defense, but the elimination of the PLF had been deemed such a high priority that those heroes had been attached to the operation. It didn't take long for them to reach the room containing the Commission's true leadership. An armored door slid down as a last-ditch effort to stop them, but a few super strong blows from Redistro shattered it, and the villains strode in. Well, 9 said. I was expecting more of a fight. Of the half-dozen people sitting at the far table, only one of them remained calm. The others leaned back in varying degrees of terror, as if putting a few more inches between them and the villains would somehow save them. The woman at the center of the table, however, looked somewhere between bored and mildly annoyed at their presence. She was the perfect image of a businesswoman, with a pressed suit jacket and skirt. Nobody here truly fooled themselves into thinking our security would stop the likes of you, the Commission president said calmly. She even had the gall to go back to looking at the papers in front of her. Our best hope was to hold you off long enough for the heroes to arrive, but that clearly failed. Chimera raised an eyebrow. You don't seem afraid, considering you're about to die. The president merely raised an eyebrow right back. Killing me would be the height of stupidity, considering what I have to offer you. Redistro scoffed. When an opposing force holds all the cards, the best option is to fold with grace. That's just basic business practice. Oh, I have one card left to play. She slid the papers in their direction. That contains a full pardon for each of you. A clean slate, you'll have your lives back, and with only 2 conditions. Redistro shared a glance with the other villains. For the sake of argument, what are those conditions? The first is that you hand over Shigaraki to Mura, or at least provide actionable intelligence on how to defeat him. The president shrugged. The other is that you go to some other country and become their problem. I only care about Japan's future, and it becomes much darker with you in it. To their credit, the villains considered what taking that deal would be like. For about half a second, I don't know what's dumber, Chimera said. That you'd think we'd abandon Shigaraki, or that we'd give up right when things are going our way. The president frowned. You don't know what destroying us will unleash on you. The world doesn't want villains like you running amok. The world wants peace and stability. A threat to that will bring every nation down on Japan. The heroes of those other nations will tear this country apart to find and destroy you. Can you really risk that? 9 loomed over her and chuckled. Considering what Shigaraki is becoming, I think we'll take that risk. 30 seconds later, Skeptic's team rejoined the others, just as they emerged from the blood-splattered room. Aw, did I miss the slaughter? Toga pouted. I only got to kill 1 guard. 9 ignored her and turned to Skeptic. Do you have the data? I have everything, Skeptic said, the one eye visible between his bangs wide with excitement. Every dirty secret, every scandal, everything we would need to destroy the heroes in the eyes of the public. And after we kill them all, their reputation will be so ruined that no one would dare take up their cause. Slice finished, and elbowed Skeptic. Nice work, for a nerd. Furious, Skeptic opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Redistro put a hand on his shoulder. Yes, excellently done, Skeptic. Thank you, sir. Skeptic glanced at his open laptop. According to the plan, we need to rendezvous at the safe house. We'll remain there until tomorrow morning. You sure we can't go help Shigaraki? Toga asked. 9 shook his head. Even if the plan had to be implemented early, the instructions were explicit. Shigaraki needs time to get used to his new power, and we can't risk getting caught in the crossfire. Oh, I know that. Toga grinned. I just wanted to watch the bloodbath. Recovery Girl sighed as she walked down the hall to her office. She knew about the ongoing operation, both in Gunga and Jaku, but it had been decided that she wouldn't be privy to the information as it happened. Apparently, people thought she was too old for that kind of stress. Please, I work in a school packed with teenagers, she scoffed. If all the drama, fights and underage sex didn't driven me insane, nothing will. As she reached her office, she frowned. She might have been old, but her memory was sharp, and she knew the door had been completely closed when she left. Had Eri gone off on her own? No, All Might should have been with her to prevent such a thing, unless he took her with her in some misguided attempt to keep her entertained. Because that was exactly what the numbskull would do. He never considered the consequences of his actions until it was far too late. Recovery Girl slid open the door and readied her cane to smack some sense into All Might. Instead, she felt a chill when she saw Eri tucked in on one of the beds. Her eyes were closed, and she looked absolutely exhausted. To make matters worse, All Might wasn't there. Instead, there was a young woman with a white coat standing over Eri. She turned as Recovery Girl entered the room, and the old hero briefly wondered if she was suffering dementia. The young woman looked so alike that she could have been Eri's sister. You're right on time, the intruder said, and smirked as if she'd told a joke only she understood. Who are you? Recovery Girl demanded. What have you done to the girl? And where is All Might? The other woman inclined her head, and Recovery Girl didn't fail to notice her horn, exactly like Eri's. All I've done is help stabilize Eri's powers. She used quite a bit of energy, and it was causing her to grow sick. All Might didn't exactly make her comfortable before he left. As for who I am, you can call me Paradox. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to keep an eye on my friend. There was a flash of light, and then Paradox vanished. Recovery Girl took half a second to make sure there was no immediate danger, and then hurried over to Eri. Sure enough, the little girl was only suffering from exhaustion, but seemed otherwise fine. She then thought about what Paradox had said. All Might, what did you do? Endeavor didn't waste time, and unleashed an enormous wave of fire at Shigaraki. He was completely covered by the inferno, and for a moment, Uravity let herself hope that it was over. That hope died an instant later when Shigaraki calmly stepped out of the fire. Part of his shirt was burning, but he patted it out like it was nothing. Still grinning from his place in thin air, Shigaraki pointed a single finger at Endeavor. There was a loud bang, as a bullet formed around his finger and fired. The bullet not only hit Endeavor in the shoulder, but nearly severed his arm with a powerful explosion. The hero let out a strangled cry and fell to the ground. The doctor was right, Shigaraki mused. Comprehension and creation are a good combo. I can make high explosive bullets. Creation, Genesis whispered. He has my quirk. How? Uravity didn't have time to even try to answer. Her heart jumped into her throat when she saw Ryukyu plummet from above, her massive claws ready to tear Shigaraki apart. Just before she hit him, Shigaraki flipped up and back with the grace of a professional gymnast and landed on her back. Ryukyu had half a second to look terrified, and then Shigaraki ripped off her wings. He didn't even use decay, but simply slapped the back of his hand against each wing. She screamed in agony as she crashed into the ground. Shigaraki laughed as he landed next to her. So this is what strength like All Might's is like. This must be why he really smiles all the time, not that trying to make people feel safe crap. Someone screamed. Uravity wasn't sure if it was her when Shigaraki kicked Ryukyu in the ribs, and she went skidding across the ground to Endeavor's feet. blood was pouring from gashes in her back. There were now terrible scrapes across her body, and it was clear that her ribs were shattered. 2 top heroes taken down in less than a minute, Shigaraki said with a manic grin. And I killed Crust a few minutes ago. Not a bad start. Endeavor hurled a spear of fire with his good arm. You haven't beaten me. Shigaraki leaned out of the way of the attack, and then vanished. A heartbeat later, and he was inside Endeavor's reach. With a lazy swipe of his hand, Endeavor's chest was sliced open like he'd been hit with a sword. Blood sprayed everywhere, and he collapsed by Ryukyu. Now I have, Shigaraki said. Now that he was closer, Uravity could see what was off about Shigaraki's eyes. They were dark voids, with tiny lights, like stars in the night sky. It should have been beautiful, but Uravity felt a chill go up her spine at the sight. Shigaraki looked over at Class 1 and smirked. Oh, look, the junior heroes. I told my minions not to kill you at your little camp, but things have changed. He leaned forward, but didn't move at blinding speed. He frowned, until his gaze landed on Eraserhead, whose eyes glowed and hair rose up. Ah, Eraserhead, I was hoping you'd show up. Shigaraki held up one fist. Your quirk might be the only thing on this planet that could slow me down. Run, Eraserhead said to his students. We'll hold him off until reinforcements get here, but I'm not risking your lives. Sensei, Genesis took a tentative step in his direction. Eraserhead held his hand out to stop her, though he didn't take his eyes off of Shigaraki. Now, Ingenium stood next to him. I'll make sure they get escorted out of here. Gentle, of course, Ingenium. Gentle bounced down from a platform of elastic air. I will protect them with my life. In any other situation, Uravity would have been surprised that a now former villain she'd seen on the internet was somehow on their side. As it was, she was just trying not to let terror overwhelm her, and numbly followed after Ingenium's newest sidekick. Shigaraki grinned at the wavering heroes. Now that the kids are headed back to school, the adults can play. We're not here to play, Eraserhead growled. And you can't use your quirks anymore, so you might as well surrender. Why don't you come over here and make me? Shigaraki slammed his foot down. Even with his quirks suppressed, his body had been modified to handle that kind of power, and the sheer strength kicked up a huge cloud of dust. With Eraserhead's gaze obscured, Shigaraki immediately felt his power return. He dashed over to the nearest heroes and brushed his fingers against them. Some disintegrated from decay, and others exploded in a shower of blood from overhaul. Then a golden blur rocketed up from underground, and a fist connected with his jaw. Tower, thanks to comprehension, Shigaraki knew exactly what had happened, even though they had connected for just a moment. For a brief instant, Lemillion had channeled 100% of One for All through his body. It had caused horrible aches in his muscles, but he had instinctively known that the only way to hurt Shigaraki would be to put his all into that blow. All that information flooded Shigaraki's mind before he hit the ground. He rose to his feet, and his tongue explored a gap where a few teeth used to be. Ouch. He tapped his jaw with one finger, and then Overhaul rebuilt his broken bones. Not bad, kid, but you're really dumb. All Might's successor or not, you shouldn't fight me alone. Lemillion grinned. Who said I was alone? Shigaraki spotted the shadow and looked up, but before he could get out of the way, Eraserhead got a clear look at him again, and his enhanced speed wouldn't activate. That was all Spirala needed to slam a huge spiral of energy into him from above. And when it faded, Sun Eater cracked him over the head with a giant clamshell. Shigaraki fell to his knees, but managed to punch Sun Eater's clam hand. It shattered, along with most of the bones in his forearm. Tamaki, get back, Spirala cried, and fired again. This time, Shigaraki rolled out of the way and picked up a chunk of concrete. He hurled it with the force of a cannon, and the only reason it didn't take Spirala's head off was because Lemillion pulled her out of the way with Black Whip. Shigaraki scowled, and then slammed his fist into the ground. Another cloud of dust was kicked up, and his quirks returned. Eraserhead is the real problem, he thought. I kill him, and it's game over for these maggots. Shigaraki moved at blinding speed. Lemillion tried to follow him, but Shigaraki waved his arm, and dozens of small bombs fell to the ground. Lemillion had to use permeation to avoid the blast, but it slowed him down enough for Shigaraki to get a good lead. With his other arm, Shigaraki created a large shield of reflective material to protect himself from Eraserhead's quirk. An odd pain made Shigaraki glance at his arm. There were black cracks forming on his skin, and it felt like it was going deeper down to his bones. He grimaced. Garaki had warned him that he needed to undergo the entire procedure, or he would only get so far before falling apart. Other heroes started attacking as soon as he emerged from the cloud of dust. He easily avoided the attacks that came from a distance, and a simple tap killed those who tried to get close. Eraserhead backed up as Shigaraki advanced. The hero could tell that he couldn't affect Shigaraki through his shield, so he was giving his eyes time to rest. letting your abilities run out their cooldown while your opponent is using a defense buff, Shigaraki thought. Pretty clever, Eraserhead. If this was a real game, you wouldn't be someone I'd want to face in PvP. It was too bad for Eraserhead that Shigaraki could use more than one ability at a time. All it took was a single leap, and he was inside Eraserhead's reach. His free hand reached out and grabbed Eraserhead by the throat, and only a desperate use of his quirk saved the hero from getting disintegrated by decay, or turned to mulch by overhaul. Eraser did nothing to prevent Shigaraki's inhuman strength, and there was a sickening crack as Eraserhead's larynx started to implode. Before he could finish off Eraserhead, a wall of ice erupted upward, catching Shigaraki's wrist. His grip was loosened, and the ice separated him from his target. He knew that it was Triumph who had attacked him, but as he turned, a harpoon impaled him through the thigh. A burning pain that had nothing to do with the wound itself, and comprehension told him that it was a potent neurotoxin from a species of frog. Get away from him, Triumph ordered calmly. Behind him, Genesis and Froppy stood next to a harpoon launcher, created by the former. Shigaraki immediately tried to create and fire an artillery shell to kill Genesis. Garaki had explained that, without comprehension, there was no way he would be able to use creation. Anyone intelligent enough to use it effectively could potentially be a serious threat. However, his quirks failed him, because Triumph had melted a hole in his own ice, just so that a coughing Eraserhead to get a clean look at him. When he tried to slam his foot down to create another cloud of dust, Lemillion caught his limbs with Black Whip, holding him in place until Uravity's prosthetic hand landed on his chest, and he started to float upward. My apologies, Gentle said as he landed by Eraserhead, but they were adamant about protecting you. After all, you are our best chance of apprehending this miscreant. With his throat partially crushed, all Eraserhead could do was reluctantly nod. He can't touch the ground. Genesis shouted, Sensei, don't let him use his quirks. This is our chance to defeat him. It was then that Shigaraki knew there was a real chance of him dying. Eraserhead was suppressing his quirks, meaning he couldn't heal from the harpoon and neurotoxin. His unfinished body was also starting to rebel against him. Without time to rest and overhaul himself, he wouldn't be able to complete his ascension. However, as he rose into the air, he saw something that made him smile. He took a deep breath and shouted at the top of his lungs, Machia, come to me. A deafening roar, so loud that it shook the ground for miles, was all the warning the heroes had before Gigantomachia, still in a pushing match with Ultimate Humangalsaur, arrived on the scene. With no small amount of effort, he finally shoved Deku out of the way and barreled through a handful of heroes that got in his way. He then leaped up into the air to grab his master. The sudden motion made Dabi and Alien Queen tumble off his back. Just as he was about to reach Shigaraki, a red blur rocketed through the air and crashed into him, sending the giant tumbling back. Sorry I'm late, a familiar voice bellowed, but you don't have to worry anymore, because I am here. Everyone was shocked by All Might's arrival, and even Eraserhead lost his composure and blinked. That was all the time Shigaraki needed to shake off Black Whip, and then press his hand against his leg. Overhaul removed both the harpoon and poison from his body in an instant. He then dug deep into his supply of powers, and then Uravity's quirk abruptly stopped working on him. He landed in front of a restored All Might and grinned. Well, this should be fun. Okay, it is weird having the house to ourselves, Ben said. The kids have moved out, and Gwen, Kevin and Julie are with the Titans for at least a week. You're right, it is really weird. Cora sat on Ben's lap and grinned. What do you want to do? Ben grinned back and leaned in to kiss her. Just before their lips touched, there was a flash of light. Oh, that's just typical. Wait, Eunice, what are you doing here? No time for details, Eunice all but shouted. Azmuth is grabbing your kids. We need to go right now. Ben and Kara were on their feet in an instant. Okay, what's going on? Eunice looked at them with terror in her eyes. There's a rogue celestial sapien on Izuku's earth. Ben's blood turned to ice. Oh my god. Deku groaned as he turned into swamp fire. The injuries he'd taken from Gigantomachia were bad enough that he decided to get out of Ultimate Humangalsaur early. The Omnitrix still had about 15 minutes of charge left, and if he was careful, the fight would be over before he timed out. You good, freshman? Lemillion asked as he popped out of the ground next to him. I've been better, Swampfire admitted, and looked around at the devastation. What happened? Shigaraki happened. Lemillion pointed up, where Shigaraki stared down at All Might. He's way more powerful than he used to be, and he's got multiple quirks. And I don't even know how All Might is here. That was a good point. Midoriya had already known that All Might's power was getting weaker, and Lemillion had told him how All Might's time limit was getting shorter ever since he'd passed on One for All. On top of that, All Might looked different. His muscles no longer had that tiny tremor that you would only notice if you looked hard enough. His hair stood straighter, and his eyes were no longer sunken in. It even occurred to Deku that All Might looked 20 years younger. Something in the back of his mind was screaming the answer at him. But with everything else going on, Deku just couldn't afford to listen. He could put the pieces together when Shigaraki wasn't about to destroy what was left of an entire city. All Might, Shigaraki grinned. Look at you, all buffed and ready for a one-man raid group. You probably went through something like this when you fought All for One, right? Sorry if I'm rambling, I guess I'm a little excited. All Might threw back his head and laughed. Sorry, young Shigaraki, but you have nothing on your old master. He was a monster and you're just a child throwing a tantrum. Shigaraki's smile vanished, and then the rest of him followed suit. He reappeared in front of All Might and tried to grab him, but All Might moved even faster to dodge him. All Might, don't let him touch you, Lemillion shouted. He's got his original quirk, an overhaul. Thanks for the tip, Lemillion, but I've got it from here. All Might flicked a single finger, and the blast of air sent Shigaraki tumbling to the ground. You all stand back and tend to the injured. I'll have this wrapped up in a minute. Shigaraki sat up and brushed himself off. The blow that should have broken his ribs barely caused a bruise, and even that vanished in a flash of light. Oh, did you also get some kind of regeneration quirk? All Might asked. A few, Shigaraki admitted. But those heal over a long time. Huge bursts of healing take up way too much energy. I got this awesome quirk that can undo everything you hit me with. I think it's called Rewind. Lemillion tried to grab Swampfire, but only accidentally tore off his arm. Before that arm regenerated, Swampfire bathed Shigaraki in fire. How do you have Aries quirk? Swampfire roared. Shigaraki stepped out of the fire and raised an eyebrow. Huh? Oh, right, that kid. I got it from one of Chisaki's bullets. It's a nice buff. By the way, your fire isn't even close to Endeavor's. Swampfire turned into Heat Blast. His fire blazed hot enough to melt the dirt under his feet into glass. How about now? Stay back, young Midoriya. All Might held out one hand to stop him. Shigaraki is my responsibility. Shigaraki chuckled. No, please, let him stay. It's because of him and his friends that I got this far, and I really want to thank him. So that's how it is, All Might muttered, and then glanced over his shoulder. Lemillion, this might take longer than I thought, and I can't risk Gigantomachia going on a rampage. Take that monster down. Lemillion blinked. By myself. You're the 9th holder of One for All. Your duty is to stand as the pinnacle of heroes. Go and show the world what you can do. Lemillion was uncertain, but he turned and charged after Gigantomachia, who was trying to kill any heroes that got too close. Heat Blast started to go after him, but another pressure blast bowled him over. He groaned as he got up, and then froze when he realized that All Might had attacked him. This ends today, All Might said, his smile gone. I'm not letting either of All for One students get away. For a moment, even Shigaraki looked completely lost. Wait, what the hell? Triumph felt his heart stop when he saw a familiar pink figure tumble off of Gigantomachia's back, chased by a burst of blue fire. He slid forward on his ice and barely managed to catch his girlfriend in his arms. My hero, Alien Queen said tiredly. You're really good at sweeping me off my feet. I'm going to remind you about that later, Triumph told her, and then slid over to a group of heroes and set her on her feet. You deserve a break. What he didn't say was that she really needed it. She was clearly exhausted and had several injuries, ranging from burns to broken glass in her arm. The burns made Triumph see red. Dabi had made it personal by attacking his girlfriend, and he was going to make the villain pay. Alien Queen didn't meet his eyes. I'm sorry, I tried to stop Dabi, but he kept burning away my acid. You kept him from hurting Izuku, and you're alive, that's all that matters. Triumph didn't want to aggravate her injuries by hugging her, so he settled for briefly stroking her cheek. I'm gonna go help the others. Come back in one piece, Alien Queen all but begged, even as a hero tugged her away from the fighting. Triumph ran towards Gigantomachia, and his eyes narrowed when he saw another hero wreathed in blue fire. When he got close enough, he heard Dabi's mad cackling, and his own fire flickered angrily. Dabi tried to burn Spirala, but Triumph blocked it with a massive wall of ice. Spirala flew back, and Dabi turned to face him. Hey, Machia, keep the heroes from interfering with Shigaraki's fight, he said. I've got some personal business to attend to. Gigantomachia grunted, and then lowered Dabi to the ground. A rocket, courtesy of Genesis, exploded against the giant's shoulder, and he turned his attention back to the other heroes, leaving Dabi and Triumph alone. When he got close enough to see Dabi's face, Triumph felt his heart stop. He knew that face. There was a picture of it in his mother's room that she held every day. It's been a while, Dabi taunted. I kinda wish we'd had a chance to talk when the League took your friend. "You're dead." Triumph hadn't meant to be so blunt, but those were the only words he could think to say. "You can't be alive." Dabi grinned. "Oh, you remember your dear eldest brother. That's so sweet." Shoto had never talked to anyone about his oldest brother. No one in the Todoroki family ever brought him up, because it would send them spiraling for days just by mentioning his name. In order to keep up appearances, Endeavor did everything in his power to remove his dead son from every record he could. Despite his father's intentions, Shoto was actually glad for that. It meant that he wouldn't catch his brother's name in the media if some reporter decided to bring him up in an interview. It also meant that his friends wouldn't tiptoe around the issue, because they didn't even know about the lost Todoroki sibling. "You aren't Toya," Triumph said, his voice faint. "Toya died years ago." "Aw, is that what Endeavor told you?" "I mean, he probably thought I was dead. Not even he could have survived that explosion, but I did." Dabi slowly walked forward. "Me, the son he raised to become an even greater hero than him, the son he threw away when I wasn't perfect, became even more powerful than him." The insanity was clear in Dabi's eyes, and it was enough to unnerve Triumph, who took a step back. Blue flame crackled over Dabi's arms, burning away his sleeves and charring his skin. "And to prove it to the old man, I'm gonna kill his perfect son." "What is this guy made of?" Uravity shouted as she narrowly flew around Gigantomachia's claws. "He just won't stop fighting." Genesis didn't bother answering. She just kept creating more harpoons, which Froppy coated in more poison. Neither of them considered holding back. Genesis fired her launcher at the monster's throat and face, and Froppy kept her supplied with the most lethal poisons any frog could produce. Just the harpoons alone would have killed a normal human 20 times over, and the concentrated toxin was enough to wipe out a small town. But Gigantomachia kept going like they were little more than pinpricks. Uravity wished she could use her quirk on the monster, but he was as tall as a building, and with several times the mass. If she tried making something that large float, she'd knock herself out from the strain. The best she could do was fly around Gigantomachia like a mosquito, and hope she distracted him too much for him to kill anyone else. Or, you know, me, she thought, just as an enormous hand filled her vision. "Look out, kid." A small blur tackled her out of the way, and when Uravity's vision returned to normal, she realized it was Gran Torino. The man might have been old and small, but he was so much faster and more maneuverable than she was. His moves made hers look clumsy by comparison. "When this is over, I should ask him for lessons." "How do we stop him?" Uravity asked as she flew out of the monster's range. "I'm not sure," Gran Torino admitted. "He was all for one's bodyguard back in the day, but no one's ever actually fought him. We only know that he's a tough bastard." "That isn't helpful." Gran Torino glanced at something behind her and grinned. "You want help? Well, here it comes." Uravity felt a bit of hope return when a golden blur rocketed past, and Lemillion smashed his fist into Gigantomachia's jaw. Shigaraki's champion staggered back, and when he swiped at him, Lemillion used permeation to easily pass through the attack. With a combination of Black Whip, Float, and the strength of One for All, he quickly bound Gigantomachia's hands together and held them that way. "Hit him with everything you've got," he shouted. Earphone Jack shook Gigantomachia to his bones with waves of sound, followed by a bolt of electricity from Charge-a-Bolt that hit him directly in the eye. The jolt to his brain made him roar and stagger, and gave Ground Zero the perfect opportunity to land a point-blank explosion to his ankle. Tsukuyomi had Dark Shadow dart underneath Gigantomachia, and the shade provided gave the living quirk the strength to tip the monster onto his side. Once Dark Shadow was out of the way, Twinkling Knight hit Gigantomachia with enough blasts from his naval laser to leave a sizable scorch, which he considered a suitable trade for the pain it caused his stomach. It wasn't just students attacking. While something deep in their souls told them fighting Shigaraki was suicide, Gigantomachia was just frightening, and heroes could handle fear. Pixie Bob hit him with coils of earth to hold him down, and then a pair of enormous hands to grab him by the throat. Other heroes focused their attacks on Gigantomachia's face, and he was hit by everything from physical strikes to energy and elemental attacks. Heroes whose quirks weren't suited for direct combat did what they could to help their colleagues. Some of them healed, while others provided logistical support. The biggest contribution, however, came from someone who had been a criminal not that long ago. "Gentle," Limbrava shouted. "I love you." Gentle smiled at her as her quirk empowered him. He had created a series of elasticized air platforms and had been bouncing between them to build up speed. Without Limbrava strengthening him, the G's he was pulling would have knocked him out, but now it felt like nothing could slow him down. After one more bounce, he aimed himself at Gigantomachia's jaw, right where Lemillion had left a sizable crack in his hide. The shockwave from the impact made even Lemillion stagger, and created a crater almost 10 feet deep under Gigantomachia's head. It also broke Gentle's arm in 4 places, but he considered the pain worth it. At least, until Gigantomachia's eyes snapped open, and he shook himself free of Pixie Bob's restraints. With a roar, he backhanded Gentle into the undamaged part of Jaku, clean through several buildings. Without La Brava's quirk, and if he hadn't desperately set up a few elastic barriers at the last second to cushion the blow, Gentle would have been killed instantly. As it was, he was knocked out, and nearly every bone in his body was broken. No, Lemillion jumped up towards Gigantomachia's chin. But instead of hitting him, he phased up and out the top of his head, and then latched onto his hair with Black Whip. He reeled himself back to the top of Gigantomachia's head and punched him over and over. Without realizing it, Lemillion had started tapping into the full power of One for All. His knuckles cracked and shattered, his arms began to bleed, but he refused to stop. His punches were a blur, and Gigantomachia's scalp burst open from the unbelievable amount of punishment. Gigantomachia roared again, but this time there was pain, and he desperately tried to shake off his attacker. Lemillion jumped back, but only because he saw one last chance to put the monster down. Uravity had not been idle during this fight. She had flown over to Virtus and Genesis and presented a wild idea. The fact that Genesis thought it might work, and that Virtus actually wanted to go through with it, showed how desperate the fight was. Using the last of her lipids, Genesis created a large spike of tungsten the size of her entire leg, with a flat top and some rudimentary straps. Uravity then used her quirk on both it and Virtus, and flew them high into the air. After Virtus attached the straps to one of his feet, Uravity carefully aimed him at Gigantomachia, and released her quirk. At first, Virtus simply let gravity do its work, building up speed while he angled this way and that, looking for the best possible spot to land. When he saw it, he dug deep into his quirk and unleashed his best move, Recipro Turbo. Uravity had to shield her eyes from the blinding light coming from Virtus boosters. Had any windows still been intact, they would have shattered from Virtus moving several times the speed of sound. The tungsten spike slammed into Gigantomachia with the force of a ballistic missile. The impact broke Virtus' leg. But even if he wanted to stop from the pain, he couldn't. His move, simply put, expended all the energy his engines could muster into a single, uninterrupted thrust, and wouldn't stop until that energy was depleted. The hit didn't kill Gigantomachia, or even knock him out. It did, however, slam him into the ground chin first with enough force to register as a seismic event. The straps around Virtus' feet snapped, and he corkscrewed through the air as he lost control of his thrust. Eventually, he crashed, and though his armor saved him from life-threatening injuries, he was still hurt and unconscious. "Did we get him?" Uravity asked. "No idea," Gran Torino said as he flew next to her. "Impressive plan, kid, but if he walks that off, we might be out of options." As if to confirm their worst fears, Gigantomachia staggered to his feet, blood poured down his scalp, and chunks of armored flesh fell to the ground, but he still stood. He roared loud enough to shake the earth, and lumbered towards the heroes. He took one step, then another, and then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. "Well, I'll be damned." Gran Torino chuckled. "Looks like we just needed to hit him with something like a damn orbital strike." "Great work, kid." Uravity would have happily accepted the compliment, but she was too busy being worried about everyone down on the ground. Every hero that wasn't dead was either exhausted or seriously injured. Genesis had used up so many lipids that she'd passed out, for one, and Froppy was so dehydrated from all the poison she'd secreted that she was being rushed to the rear. Even those who had only overused their quirks were in no position to help against Shigaraki or Dabi. Gran Torino could see her worry on her face. "Today was a bad day, girl, but it's always darkest before the dawn. We'll mourn, and then we'll rebuild." "You really believe that?" "If I didn't at least try, I'd be spitting on the memory of my friend, Nana." Uravity blinked. "Do you mean Shimura Nana?" Gran Torino did a double take. "How do you know about her?" "I read about her from a book my friend has." She chuckled. "I think Deku would love to talk to you about her, if you don't mind." There was a sudden boom, and then heat blast soared through the air. He crashed into the ground, and staggered to his feet. Uravity and Gran Torino turned in the direction he'd come from. They saw All Might with his fist extended, and Shigaraki looking both confused and amused. "What is that idiot doing?" Gran Torino shouted, and rocketed towards them. "Stay here, girl, you're not ready for this fight." As much as Uravity wanted to argue, the last time she'd tried fighting someone out of her league, she had lost her arm. All she could do was help everyone else, and hope that her boyfriend didn't get himself killed. "You're gonna have to explain that one, All Might," Shigaraki said. How do you think Midoriya works for All for One? I'd like to hear the answer for that. 2. Heat Blast groaned as he got to his feet. All Might put his fists on his hips. You can't expect me to believe that someone with as many quirks as you isn't connected to All for One. Tennison-san was an interesting cover story, but there were too many holes, and All for One threw the fight against us. He should have fought much harder. Shigaraki just gave him a disbelieving look. Okay, you look younger, but you somehow have dementia, because that is the stupidest thing I've heard in a while. There's no point in keeping up this charade, Shigaraki Tamura. All Might glared up at him. Or should I call you Shimura Tenko? Shigaraki blinked. Huh? Oh, you know about that. I don't go by that name anymore, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't use it. It's who you really are, All Might argued. Your grandmother was Shimura Nana, my mentor. She was killed by All for One a long time ago, but not before she passed on her dream of a society free of evil. You say that like I care. Shigaraki dropped to the ground and drove his fist into All Might's stomach. It drove him back a step, but there was none of the power there should have been. Damn it, Eraser, that's starting to get annoying. Eraserhead never took his eyes off of Shigaraki. Deku, get out of here. I'm not dealing with All Might's crap today, and I'm not going to let Shigaraki kill you. Despite how he felt about Midoriya, All Might wasn't about to let an opportunity slip by, and grabbed Shigaraki by the arm. The barest twitch of his muscles crushed the younger man's bones in an instant. However, Shigaraki grabbed All Might and heaved him over his shoulder with his good arm, and hurled him into Heat Blast. All Might let out a grunt, the only sign of pain from the burns that immediately charred his flesh. Shigaraki grabbed a chunk of stone and hurled it at Eraserhead with the speed of an artillery shell. Proving that his reflexes were at peak human capability, he managed to avoid a lethal strike, but the rock still hit him in the shoulder, shattering bone and sending him sprawling to the ground. He groaned and tried to rise, but with his gaze on Shigaraki broken for a moment, that was all that was needed for Shigaraki to close the distance and grab him by the face. Eraserhead clawed futilely at the hand holding him. Deku, run. Aizawa. All Might tried to get to his colleague, but a column of stone rose up in front of him. The stone then transmuted into steel, and spikes shot out like bullets. All Might deflected the projectiles with rapid-fire gusts of air from his fists. He felt a wave of heat, and ducked back to allow Heat Blast to melt the rest before they got close. Save him. Heat Blast begged. I'll make you a path. All Might hesitated. With his speed, it would have been easy to reach Shigaraki and free Eraserhead, especially with Heat Blast melting a hole through whatever Shigaraki threw at him. He knew that, in his heart, but the whispers of a restored One for All still told him that this was too close to his true enemy to be coincidence. That hesitation proved fatal. With a single twitch, Shigaraki crushed Eraserhead's skull in a shower of blood. His lifeless body fell to the ground, and Shigaraki chuckled as he shook blood and gore from his hand. So that's what it's like to be overleveled, he mused. No. Shigaraki raised a hand and created a tungsten shield to block the intense fire from Heat Blast, only to get punched in the chest by All Might. He tumbled back, but recovered easily, and blocked All Might's next flurry of blows. You seem slow, All Might, Shigaraki said casually, as if he was discussing the weather. You look like you got all your power back, so why are you so weak? Or am I just that much stronger now? All Might's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of pure rage. He might not have gotten along with Aizawa all the time, but the man certainly didn't deserve to be murdered for it. He hated himself for not acting sooner to save him. Instead, all he could do was bring his killer to justice. If only Midoriya hadn't thrown his lot in his All for One, I wouldn't have been distracted. I could have saved him. There was a flash of green light, and then a wave of deafening noise as Echo unleashed his sonic scream. Both All Might and Shigaraki took a step back from the sound, but the former had to lean away from a sudden lunge from the latter. They engaged in a blindingly fast exchange of blows, yet were able to perfectly dodge each attack. Echo had been annoying, but he wasn't strong enough to truly hurt them. Ignoring Deku turned out to be a mistake. Come on, Jen urged. We need to go. What the heck is taking you so long? I'm trying, Ken protested. Something is strengthening the barriers between universes. It's like trying to cut through 8 layers of cardboard with scissors. What is going on with today? Julie asked, exasperated. Nothing good, I'll tell you that, Ben said, arms crossed and foot tapping. If Azmuth is right, and he usually is, then we are in a world of trouble. Jen bit her lip. I'm worried Izuku already is in a world of trouble. Midoriya didn't consider himself a hateful person. Anger wasn't usually his first reaction to anything. Yet in the last few months, he'd encountered 3 people he truly wanted to kill. The first was Chisaki, for what he did to Eri. The second was Vilgax, whose slaughter of his entire universe had barely been reversed. And now, there was Shigaraki, who had murdered his teacher right in front of him. His rage blinded him to his own safety as he turned into Ultimate Echo Echo. He was much taller than in his original form, with blue metallic skin, longer limbs, and blue discs all over his body. Deku knew that going ultimate again was a bad idea. The Omnitrix could, in theory, allow him to go ultimate twice, but only at full charge. He wasn't sure what would happen with less than 15 minutes of power remaining. He also knew, at that moment, that he didn't give a damn. "You are going to pay for that," he roared, and aimed his hands at Shigaraki. Spears of solid sound lanced out, first impaling Shigaraki through the shoulders, and then exploding outwards, nearly severing his arms from his body. Shigaraki fell to one knee, but not out of pain or exhaustion. Instead, he let his hand brush the ground, and a massive fist of stone erupted up, punching Ultimate Echo Echo into the air. By the time he hit the ground, Shigaraki had used Overhaul to heal himself, and then backhanded All Might with enough force to send him flying hundreds of feet away. "I think I'm done with this," Shigaraki said, and floated up into the air. "This was fun, Midoriya, but you just don't have what it takes to beat me." He raised one hand and created an earpiece. "Kurogiri, Machia and Dabi need extraction. I'll be along shortly." Ultimate Echo Echo got to his feet. "You aren't going anywhere." Shigaraki raised one hand to his face and frowned when cracks began forming in his skin, like broken pottery. For a moment, Deku was reminded of Gwen when she was turning into an anodite. But instead of glowing energy seeping from the cracks, it was blood. Shigaraki narrowed his eyes, and the injury slowly reversed. But as soon as he stopped concentrating, the cracks reappeared. "Well, that's annoying," he muttered, and then looked down at the heroes. "Looks like I'll be cutting this short until I fix this debuff. See you later." "I just said that you're not going anywhere." Ultimate Echo Echo flew up so that he was level with him. Shigaraki sighed. "I mean, I guess I could play for a little longer, Midoriya, but won't All Might think it's some convoluted scheme?" "I don't care what he thinks." Ultimate Echo Echo's hands vibrated with building energy. "Just so long as I take you down." "Ooh, scary," Shigaraki mocked. "I'll show you that you're not the strongest anymore." Ultimate Echo Echo blasted Shigaraki with sound that would have shattered steel. It drove him back a short distance, with blood running from his ears. The injuries healed in moments, but then the cracks appeared around his ears, just like the ones on his arm. "You're falling apart, Shigaraki," Ultimate Echo Echo realized. "You can't handle that kind of power, and it's killing you." "Because you stupid heroes stopped me before I was finished," Shigaraki accused. "It doesn't matter, though. I can finish the process on my own, even if it takes a while. Only if you get away." Ultimate Echo Echo pulled one of the discs off his body and hurled it at Shigaraki. It hovered just outside his reach and replicated until there were enough to completely encircle Shigaraki. "This is Aizawa-sensei." Each disc emitted waves of sound, and each was amplified by the others. Even people who weren't the target of the attack and were hundreds of feet away had to cover their ears from the sound. Shigaraki, on the other hand, was the main focus. His flesh burst, his bones shattered, and for a moment, he looked like he was about to be crushed into paste. "No Nuo." Gritting shattered teeth, Shigaraki slowly put his body back together. More cracks appeared, making him look like a broken statue that had been glued together. Ultimate Echo Echo's discs merged together and returned to his body. He held up one hand, already humming with power. "Stand down. Final warning." Shigaraki glared at him, even as his eyes leaked blood. "You think I'd just give up, right when I'm about to get everything I've always wanted?" "It might save your life," Ultimate Echo Echo said, then shrugged. "Not that I really care if you keep breathing." "Funny, I was about to say the same thing about you." "Those aren't the words of a hero, young Midoriya," All Might admonished as he got back in the fight. As much as All Might considered Midoriya an enemy, he figured that Shigaraki was closer to defeat, and wasn't above capitalizing on that. He rocketed into the air, appearing behind Shigaraki in a flash. Texas Smash. Ultimate Echo Echo leaned out of the way as Shigaraki was pushed by the power of a hurricane, focused in a single punch. He managed to stop before he crashed into the ground, then turned and aimed one hand at the two heroes. Die. Crackling black tendrils lunged out from the air right in front of his hand. Ultimate Echo Echo let gravity take hold to avoid the attack, and All Might dodged with a quick application of air pressure. The attack hit the ruined building behind them, and immediately exploded with the force of an artillery strike. Shigaraki's hand also detonated in a miniature version of the explosion, but he quickly restored it with Overhaul. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. He didn't know what quirk that was, so he used comprehension on himself. "Antimatter. Where the hell did Garaki find that quirk?" Shigaraki. Ultimate Echo Echo floated in front of him, both hands pointed at his face. Shigaraki noticed that he was trembling, and the dial on his chest was rapidly blinking red. You won't. Shigaraki grinned. Looks like we're both near our limit, huh? Too bad. I've still got a little left in the tank, but you look like you're about to die. In fact, let me help with that. No one else is dying? Shigaraki, All Might said, fists on his hips. I won't allow it. The days when you can stop me are long past, All Might. Shigaraki knelt and placed one hand on the ground and aimed the other at Deku. Nobody can stop me. Ultimate Echo fired 2 sonic blasts, just as Shigaraki simultaneously unleashed decay on the ground, and a gust of wind with the other that made All Might's moves look like a light breeze. Ultimate Echo put everything he had into his own attack, just to keep himself from being blown away. All Might hadn't been directly behind him, and the wind knocked him over 100 miles back, through some buildings, deflecting off a mountain, and into the ocean. Ultimate Echo hadn't been touching the ground, and wasn't affected by Shigaraki's decay, but there were still hundreds of civilians, first responders and heroes close enough to be instantly killed by the wide-ranged attack. A moment later, Shigaraki was spent and he collapsed. Just before he hit the ground, one of Kurogiri's portals swallowed him up, and he was gone. There was a flash of red light and a human Deku staggered forward. No comeback, you can't. The last thing he saw before he passed out was the gathering clouds, and the first of the rain began to fall. Dabi chuckled. Well, looks like the show's over, showdown. I wonder how many people Shigaraki killed. Probably more than me, so I'll have to step up my game. Triumph clutched his right arm with his left. It was horribly burned, and he could barely feel it. You're a monster, Toya. You're everything Endeavor could have turned me into, and I'm going to stop you. You can try, baby brother, but round 1 clearly went to me. Dabi glanced over his shoulder to see Gigantomachia slip into a massive portal. Oh, and that's my cue to leave. Make sure the old man survives, okay? I'd hate for Shigaraki to steal my kill. Toya, wait. Triumph shot a column of fire at Dabi, but his brother just countered it with an even stronger inferno. When the flames died down, Dabi was gone. Triumph sank to his knees. Between his injuries, exhaustion, and emotional turmoil, he was beyond spent. Toya's alive, he muttered. Did Endeavor know that his son was really alive? Had he known that Toya was a villain this whole time? Did he even care? He didn't think about it, but Triumph was going to do one thing Dabi wanted. He wouldn't let Endeavor die, if only so that he could get some answers. That was the last thing he thought before his injuries caught up to him, and he passed out. You look terrible, Slice commented. Dabi shrugged, not even glancing at his charred arms. Hey, you saw me before Shigaraki fixed me up. You know I've looked worse. How'd things go with you guys? The mission was successful, Nine said. The commission was destroyed, and their information now belongs to us. Not a bad day, Dabi said with a grin. Are you insane? Skeptic glared at him. Our entire army was captured. All those soldiers, generations of preparation, all ruined in a single day. It was a necessary sacrifice, Nine said. The battle weakened the heroes considerably, and with the HPSC erased, our enemies won't have the logistics or authority to effectively counter our next move. And what move is that? Redistro asked. He was more composed than Skeptic, but his expression was still murderous. If you haven't noticed, our resources are fairly limited. We no longer have Bubegawara to replenish our numbers. Dabi blinked. Wait, Twice got caught. He's dead. Toga snarled. She had been sitting in the corner since the team had returned from their raid on the HPSC. Okay, so we took a bad loss. Dabi looked around. They got the doctor, didn't they? Chimera sighed. They did, and since we don't know where they took him, we can't rescue him. We're now officially out of Nomu, too, and both Shigaraki and Gigantomachia are currently catatonic, Nine said. However, we still have an opportunity to inflict one more blow before we go into hiding again. This one will be able to cover our tracks and increase our numbers. Compress inclined his head in Nine's direction. Even with the commission gone, it would only make sense that the best targets would be heavily defended. Not if the entire country was thrown into chaos by our distraction. Nine held up Skeptic's laptop. And as it so happens, I know exactly which of the Commission's dirty secrets we can use. It would have to be one hell of a secret to distract the entire country right now, Slice pointed out. In response, Nine opened the file he'd been reading and showed it to the others. More than one of them had to read it multiple times before they truly grasped the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Holy shit, Chimera said once he'd remembered how to breathe. Yeah, that'll do the job. Nine shoved the laptop back into Skeptic's hands. Upload that to everyone you can, not just Japan, but the entire world. That should cause more than enough chaos for what I have planned. And what, exactly, does that plan entail? Redistro asked. Nine still wore his mask, but those who had known him long enough could tell that he was smiling. We're going to pay a visit to Tartarus. Sir Night Eye held up a hand to shield his eyes from the wind that whipped around him. Gale Force did his best, but even his insane control couldn't completely stop his wind from washing over the heroes he carried. Even with the wind making his eyes sting, he couldn't miss the horrific devastation. Most of Jaku City had been completely destroyed, with only a few damaged buildings on the outskirts still standing. Night Eye felt sick when he considered the potential tens of thousands of lives lost. "Get us down there," he ordered, raising his voice to be heard over the wind. "We need to find other heroes and see where we can be most effective." Next to him in the enormous sphere of wind, Cellophane nodded. "Why yeah, but can anyone be okay down there?" "Remain calm," Night Eye told him. "Panicking will not do anyone any good, and neither will giving up hope. We must hold on to the possibility that our friends and colleagues have survived, or even emerged victorious." Cellophane nodded again, much steadier this time. "Okay, I can do that." "Hey." They turned to see Gale Force pointing down. "I think I see Deku. I saw a flash of red light. Could that be him?" Night Eye frowned. Deku's transformations are always with a green light. Cellophane felt a chill go down his spine. "Not if his watch ran out of power. He told me a red light meant he could be in real trouble." "Get us to that light," Night Eye said immediately. "If that is Deku, he may require medical assistance." As they got closer to the ground, Night Eye's stomach turned. Bodies were everywhere, most of them in pools of blood. Some were still alive, but many of them had lost far too much blood to survive. Others were simply in too many pieces. Once they were on the ground, groups of Night Eye's task force broke off to assist the wounded, while Night Eye himself led Cellophane and Midnight on a search for Deku. When they found him, they saw that he wasn't alone. Night Eye wasn't sure who he was more surprised to see: the Tennison family, along with 3 teenagers he didn't recognize, or All Might, somehow in the prime of his life, if somewhat injured. He was also worried, since the Tennisons and company looked ready to throw down with All Might. Even worse, the man he used to work for looked just as eager for that fight. "What did we miss?" Cellophane asked faintly. "If you even think of putting Izuku in prison, I will personally throw you into the sun." Supergirl snarled, eyes blazing red. Night Eye blinked. "I believe we missed a lot." Sir Night Eye didn't have time to analyze the situation. He barely had time to see that Midoriya was unconscious, likely badly injured, and cradled in the arms of a girl wearing a hulking suit of black and green armor. The only other thing he saw was that All Might was glaring at the young man that Night Eye had pledged his support to. "All Might, stand down," he snapped. "Shigaraki and the League escaped," All Might said, not looking at him. "I can't let All For One's other agent get away." "All For, how are you so blind?" After everything that had happened today, Night Eye wasn't even going to try being diplomatic. "Even if your ridiculous claims are true, look around. This isn't the time for your vendetta. There are people in this city that need help." Speaking of which, Ultiman snapped his fingers. "I just moved everyone who was hurt, and anyone who was trapped under the rubble, to the nearest hospital." He grinned, including Izuku. Night Eye blinked. Sure enough, Midoriya was gone. All Might glared Ultiman, but before he could take more than a step in his direction, Supergirl grabbed his arm and squeezed. To Night Eye's shock, there was a sickening crack, and All Might pulled back with a broken arm. "I saw that look," Supergirl said, eyes blazing red. "Don't even think about attacking my kids." I'd listened to her. Ben hadn't transformed yet, and seemed remarkably calm. But there was a cold glint in his eyes that made the hairs on the back of Night Eye's neck rise. "My family is very protective." "Young Midoriya isn't your cousin," All Might accused. "I don't know what your relationship is, but you aren't family." Night Eye looked at Ben for his reaction. All he got was a raised eyebrow, and then a glance at his family, who collectively shrugged. "If you're saying we aren't related, you're right. I think it's time to come clean, if only to get you off Izuku's back." Ben sighed. "But first, we should probably get you to the hospital. You know, since you've got a broken arm now." All Might's glare could reduce most criminals to tears, but the Tennisons didn't even blink. "You think you're scary?" Ultra Girl nonchalantly asked. "You got nothing on Batman." Finally, All Might took a step back. "Fine, but you had better explain yourselves." Ben sighed again. "With what's happened, we really can't afford to not be totally honest. Can you take us all to the hospital?" Ultiman shrugged. "Sure, but if he goes after Izuku again, I say we sick mom on him again." "I'm for that," Julie said, glaring at All Might with eyes eerily similar to Midoriya's. "If she does not stop him, I will," Night Eye said, and gave All Might a look full of disappointment. "You will not threaten that boy again, Toshinori." All Might didn't back down. "That depends on what the truth is." Uraraka wanted to pace, but she was too exhausted. The best she could manage was bouncing her leg up and down as she waited for news. Whether he thought they needed to be looked at, or maybe he wanted them to be with their friends, Ultiman had sent Uraraka and Zero to the waiting room of the hospital. The rising stars were a mixed bag of injuries. Todoroki had been badly burned, and only his resistance to fire had kept him from getting incinerated. Ashido's acid coating had also saved her life, but her own burns were serious, and there were several bad injuries from shrapnel, thanks to her ride on Gigantomachia. Ida's leg was shattered in several places, and had been rushed into surgery to repair both his leg and his engines. Yaoyorozu and Asui weren't actually injured, but the former had nearly killed herself from using so many lipids, and the latter was so badly dehydrated that she'd been given both an IV and a soak in a tub to give her as much liquid as possible. The worst of them all, however, was Midoriya. At least, Uraraka assumed he was in the worst shape, since she hadn't been able to even find out where he was. The only reason she even knew he was in the same hospital was when she heard a nurse mention him over her phone. You know, some people might think you're clingy, Shiro joked tiredly. Can you blame me? Uraraka asked. Look at it from my point of view, and tell me I shouldn't be worried sick about that boy. I never said it wasn't deserved. Shiro idly kicked at his helmet, where it rested next to Uraraka's. I don't think things have ever been this bad. Uraraka winced. The butcher's bill was still being calculated, but even the most optimistic estimates placed the death toll at over 20,000. At least, over 200 heroes were dead, including Crust. On a personal note for the students, Aizawa had been murdered in the final minutes of the battle, and most of them were still in shock. As if the universe wanted to make Uraraka's day just a little bit worse, she spotted a familiar and unwelcome head of blonde hair marching straight at her, and she tensely got to her feet. At least Bakugo wasn't alone. Jen and a red-headed girl accompanied him, so Bakugo wouldn't do anything stupid. Jen gave Uraraka a hug. Hey, you're Ochako, right? I'm Izuku's cousin, Jen. Uraraka blinked. Even though Jen was American, she was still surprised when someone she wasn't close to called her by her first name. Hi. Do you know where Izuku is? That's why we came here, the redhead said in slightly stumbling Japanese. And Gwen Tennison, I'm Ben's other cousin. Is he okay? Shiro asked, and heaved himself up from his seat. Jen grimaced. I honestly don't know. We got kicked out of the ore as soon as we checked that he was getting help. We thought it might help if someone he cared about was pulling for him. And you brought him. Uraraka pointed at Bakugo. They hate each other. Bakugo sneered. I'm not here to give Deku a hug, round face. I've got something I need to do, and we're all going to the same place. You knew where Izuku was this whole time. Shiro raised an eyebrow. You could have told us. Bakugo held up his hands. They could all see the dried blood on his gloves. I've been helping with triage since we got here. So has everyone else in our class that can stand. You two were put on guard duty for the injured. Uraraka gaped. Wait, that's why no one told us to do anything. Nobody even said we were supposed to be here. You weren't, but I told the nurses that we asked you two to do it. Bakugo shrugged. I just didn't want you two to mope all day worrying about the Deku squad. Wow, that was almost nice of you, Uraraka managed to say. Thanks, whatever. Bakugo turned to Jen. We got him, let's move. You go on ahead, Ochako, Shiro said. I'll stay here, in case someone comes by and wonders why the people who are supposed to be on guard duty, you know. Aren't? Uraraka smiled at him. Thanks, Hanta. You have good friends, Gwen commented as they left Shiro behind. Yeah, they're the best, Uraraka said, and frowned at Bakugo when he gagged. What? Bakugo glared at her, but there was none of the usual intensity, and he sighed. I don't have it in me to be pissed off at you today. Uraraka winced. She should have known that even Bakugo wouldn't be unaffected by all the death and destruction of today. And then there was Aizawa. Even if Bakugo had never liked the teacher for never taking his side, he had always respected the man. And now he was dead. Uraraka could barely wrap her head around that herself, not to mention everything else that had happened that day. She wondered if she was in shock. As her body moved on autopilot, her mind continued to wander. So many heroes had been badly hurt during the battle. There was Endeavor, who was still in surgery as the doctors desperately tried to save his arm. And then there was Ryukyu. Could she recover from having her wings torn off? Did they grow back, since they didn't look like they fit under her skin while in her human form? Maybe Izuku knows, she thought. I'll ask him. Maybe it'll take my mind off things if he starts doing that cute mumble. Do you know how Izuku is doing? She asked. Jen sighed. All I know is that he's getting the best care. We decided to get you when we were allowed to see him. A horrifying thought occurred to Uraraka. Wait, what about his parents? Do they know yet? Jen paused mid-stride and shared a look with Gwen. Okay, you should get up to speed on that front. The two girls quickly explained that Hisashi had been kidnapped by the PLF and replaced with Toga. Izuku had rescued his father shortly before his fight with Shigaraki, but the Midoriya patriarch was also in the hospital. Inko was darting between her husband's room and her son's, and only the presence of Supergirl at her side at all times kept her from falling apart. Uraraka's heart went out to Inko. Just having one person in her family in the hospital was bad enough, and this was so much worse. Got him, Deku, Bakugo growled. He can't go getting fucked up like this when it hurts his mom that much. Since when do you care? Uraraka snapped. The fire in Bakugo's eyes faded, and he slumped. Inko, she was always nice to me. Uraraka glared at him. And you still treated her son like garbage. Bakugo sighed, but it was Gwen who came to his defense. Hey, now is the absolute worst time for you guys to be fighting each other. How about you focus on Izuku and the bad guys, and maybe we can figure out our next move before the world ends. That's a little extreme, don't you think? Uraraka asked. Jen shared a knowing look with Gwen. After what we've been through, it really isn't. Uraraka was led through the hospital, past rooms full of people moaning in pain. Some were heroes and police, but the vast majority were innocent civilians. Doctors and nurses frantically tried to save the worst of the injured, but even Uraraka could tell that they wouldn't save everyone. Believe it or not, this could have been a lot worse, Jen said quietly. If the situation is what I think it is, there's a good chance that every hospital on the planet could have been full right now. Uraraka didn't want to believe her. She felt sick enough as it was. Eventually, they reached Izuku's room, where they found Julie and Kevin standing guard. The latter had a strong grip on Hawk's shoulder to keep the man from getting inside. Last warning, chicken wing, Kevin growled. Stand down or get put down. Bakugo snickered. Chicken wing, gotta remember that one. Look, I'm not here to start anything, Hawk said tiredly. If anything, I'm here to help. Gonna need more than your word, Kevin said. You can trust him, Uraraka blurted out. He's Izuku's mentor, one of them, I mean. Kevin looked skeptical, but a nod from Jen made him step back. Fine, but you're the last one we let in today. It's getting crowded in there. Surprisingly, there were no doctors in Izuku's room. Either they were all out, and were okay with so many strangers, or said strangers had kicked them out. Uraraka recognized some of them, including Nezu and Sir Night-Eye, but not the blonde girl in what looked like a form-fitting spacesuit, nor the wizened old version of Grey Matter. Those two were hunched over several alien machines and muttering to each other. Uraraka took them all in at a glance. She was more concerned with her boyfriend, who looked absolutely dreadful. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and he was shivering, despite the relative warmth inside the room from so many bodies. What really caught her attention, however, was that the green scars around his arm had gotten longer. They had crept all the way up his arm, to just past his collar, and Uraraka suspected they had moved across his chest as well. Even worse, smaller scars now spread out from the corners of his eyes. They almost looked like a shredded mask. Oh, cousin, Jen whispered, what did you do to yourself? Nezu raised an eyebrow at her. You say that like this was not inflicted by Shigaraki. It wasn't, the gray alien snapped. I was very specific when I told him what he could and could not do with his new Omnitrix. I told him to only limit himself to one hyper-evolution per recharge cycle. I should have built that into the system to prevent this exact situation. But I was convinced that he was far more responsible than Ben was at this age. It said much about the situation that Ben didn't even protest, and was focused on Izuku. At that point, Uraraka stared at the little alien with wide eyes. She realized that this was Azmuth, not only the creator of the Omnitrix, but the reason quirks existed. It was more than a little shocking to meet the man responsible for the single greatest change in her Earth's history. I'm confused, Hawks confessed. I thought the watch just sorted through his weird DNA to give him his transformations. Right, you're not in the know, Ben said with a sigh. Okay, short version, Azmuth, the little guy, spread alien DNA across this Earth. And that's why you have quirks. Izuku doesn't have a quirk, but that watch has pure samples of that same alien DNA. But when his Ultimatrix broke, it gave him all of that DNA at once. His Omnitrix actually does sort through the DNA now, but also keeps it from killing him. Hawks and Night-Eye blinked once, twice, and then the former scratched his head. Aliens, this Earth, Night-Eye muttered. The multiverse is a thing, Ben said casually. Accept what he says, Nezu said tiredly. I can personally vouch for him. If that was the abridged version, I'm almost afraid to ask what the full version is like, Hawks said. There was so much suddenly being thrown at him that he wasn't sure how to react, or even what to react to. Uraraka had already known all of this, so while Ben and Nezu gave some more details to the people not already in the loop, she went over to Azmuth. Excuse me, Azmuth-san. She gave a quick bow just to be polite. What's wrong with Izuku? Azmuth glanced up at her. Who are you? Uraraka Ochako. I'm his girlfriend. Azmuth sighed. I'm getting too old for this nonsense. Fine, I'll explain. To put it bluntly, he's an idiot. Hey, several people shouted at once. Be offended all you like. It doesn't change the fact that he deliberately damaged his health. Azmuth took a deep breath. As I said before, his Omnitrix can only handle one hyper-evolution per charge. Because he used more than one, it briefly shorted out and stopped stabilizing his DNA. For a few minutes, over 1 million different species were going to war with his human genes. It's honestly impressive that he didn't immediately die. Even still, his long-term health will be impacted by this. Headaches and nausea, for starters, but it appears that his immune system is at least partially compromised. How long will that last? Jen asked. Azmuth sighed again. The rest of his life, which I'm positive will be much shorter now. I cannot undo what has been done to him. Even I'm not sure where the alien DNA ends and the human begins. The best I can do is help stabilize him, and perhaps help him live longer than another decade. Kevin winced. Well, crap. Bakugo had remained conspicuously silent this entire time. But Uraraka had been so worried about Midoriya that she'd completely forgotten that he was now privy to her boyfriend's secrets. She turned to face him, and saw him leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Something you want to say? She asked, her voice almost a snarl. Bakugo scoffed. What? You think I'm gonna blab about Deku's secrets? That he's a fucking fraud? First of all, round face, the only proof I have is the gray frog's word, so even if I told someone, I couldn't back it up. He sneered. Besides, it'll be way more fun to hold this over Deku's head for the rest of his life. Jen glared at him. What? You're gonna blackmail him? Please, like I'd ever pull such a bitch-ass move. Bakugo grinned, but it wasn't a nice grin. But I might enjoy making him think I will. Wow, you are an absolute bastard. Thanks, it's something I enjoy. If you two are finished, Ben said, eyebrow arched in the way only an annoyed parent can, we need to talk about Shigaraki. Night Eye nodded. What happened to him? How could he have gotten so powerful? I can understand having an additional quirk, but he was doing things far beyond anything I have ever seen. Ben shared a look with Azmuth. You want me to take this, or should you? I'm busy, and I already delivered the bad news about the boy. It's your turn. Ben sighed. Right, fine. Okay, listen up. Back in my universe, and yes, I'm from a different universe than the rest of my family. There is one species of alien above all others. They're called the Celestial Sapiens. And what is it that makes them so powerful? Night Eye asked. What can they do? Yes, Ben deadpanned. Seriously, they can do anything. They're omnipotent. That simple declaration chilled everyone who was from this earth to their very souls. It seemed impossible. Uraraka knew of no quirk that powerful, and then almost slapped herself for forgetting that quirks weren't the be-all and end-all of powers. I'm surprised you know how to say that word, Tennison, Kevin joked. I've had enough run-ins with Celestial Sapiens to know, Ben shot back, but his attempt at a joke was half-hearted at best. Still, I mean it. Traveling through time, altering reality, teleporting across space, messing with minds, destroying souls, unlimited power. Uraraka cut in before she realized what she was saying, then gave her a look. You're referencing something, but I don't know what. Still, you're right. Celestial Sapiens are beyond gods, and yeah, I've dealt with those, so I know what I'm talking about. Somehow, Shigaraki has managed to get that same power. Night Eye frowned. That seems unlikely. Dr. Garaki would have needed access to a sample of that same quirk, and someone that powerful would not have stayed a secret for long. Now it was Hawks who cut in. It's more likely than you think. All for One was able to hide his true abilities for centuries. Only a few people in the government ever knew the truth, and that was because they were in the old bastard's pocket. You're half right, Ben said, and pointed to Azmuth. Okay, it's your turn to explain, because I couldn't really follow you the last time. Azmuth paused in his work and gave Ben a side eye. And you wonder why you never went to college. The reason why no single human was given Celestial Sapien DNA was because the human body simply can't withstand it. However, I needed to know if it was at all possible, so I spread out segments of Celestial Sapien genetics. Azmuth sighed. There is another reason no one human could be trusted with that kind of power, assuming they could survive holding it. Of course, it looks like Shigaraki handled that problem, Ben said. If Azmuth's scans are right, that guy made his body strong enough to handle that kind of power, at least for a while. But he wasn't finished, Azmuth continued. The process was interrupted, and without outside processes, it will take much longer for him to become a complete Celestial Sapien. At that point, Night Eye decided that he was going to accept everything he was hearing. Nezu had clearly already done so, and this story was too insane to be fiction. How long do we have? He asked. A year, Azmuth said bluntly. Perhaps longer, if Shigaraki isn't given enough time to rest and recover. Hang on a sec, Ken cut in. There's one thing that's still bugging me. Did Shigaraki show any hesitation or signs that he was fighting himself to use his powers? Night thought back to the reports he'd read. Not that I am aware of. Ken took a deep breath. Then we are officially in the worst case scenario. Celestial Sapiens can't just do whatever they want. Each one has two personalities, complete opposites of each other. The reason why they don't just snuff out a random universe is because both personalities are constantly debating on what to do and can't agree. It takes something on a cosmic level just to get their attention, and something way worse to get them to act. Shigaraki didn't seem to have that problem. Night said. Like I said, it's the worst case scenario. We're dealing with a being capable of anything, without any restrictions. The only thing holding him back is that he probably isn't aware of how powerful he really is. But the longer this goes on, the bigger the risk. He also hasn't completely assimilated the Celestial Sapien DNA, Azmuth added. Right now, he's vulnerable. And how do we take advantage of that? Nezu asked. Ben sank into a chair. He seemed to age a lifetime in a single moment. Right now, the best way to stop him is to find him before he reaches full power and kill him. Those who knew him looked at him in shock. Dad, Jen shouted. Do you have a better suggestion? Ben snapped. Because unless a bunch of other Celestial Sapiens decide to join the party, I don't know what else to do. Dad, Ken grabbed Ben's shoulder. Remember what I can do. I'll go to them and tell them what happened. A rogue Celestial Sapien isn't something they can ignore. Ben nodded, but he still looked resigned. If you think it'll help. Ken snapped his fingers and vanished in a flash of green light. At that point, Hawks finally found his voice again. Okay, this is all fascinating, and more than a little terrifying, but how are we going to explain this to the public? I doubt we were all an alien experiment is going to fly with the rest of the planet. Kevin raised an eyebrow at him. Did you just make a pun? Gwen elbowed her boyfriend. Not the time, Kevin. Night ignored them. In this case, I believe telling anyone would cause mass panic, assuming anyone actually believed us. It would be best to keep this information to ourselves, aside from a few people who should know. Supergirl, who had been staring worriedly at her husband until now, suddenly spun around. Guys, I'm hearing lots of raised voices, all over the city, the country. She closed her eyes and focused. It's happening all over the world. Night frowned and pulled out his phone. He had kept it silent, but saw that he had received a dozen alerts from various associates, all linking him to a news story that had gone viral. He tapped on the link and saw that a number of tests and discoveries, all buried by the HPSC, had been leaked to the entire world. Clandestine visits to an unknown satellite, unauthorized surveillance of innocent people, even kidnapping and experimenting on people with interesting quirks, and erasing memories to cover up their crimes. These findings even confirmed everything Azmuth and the Tennisons had claimed, with so many official references that Night recognized that he knew anyone with access to the internet would be able to prove that it was genuine. The brief hope that he'd had that the situation could be handled quietly was shattered, especially when one of the documents he saw involved Hawks illegally bugging Midoriya and part of a conspiracy to manipulate him, either directly or by threatening his family. There was also a contingency that involved assassinating the boy at the HPSC's say-so. Night wasn't the type of person to let his emotions get the better of him, but today wasn't a typical day, and Midoriya wasn't a typical student. His vision went red, and before he knew it, he had driven his fist into Hawk's face. "You bastard," he hissed. Hawk staggered back and wiped away the blood dripping from his nose. His eyes darted from Night to the man's phone, and he sighed. "Oh, so you figured out that I was a commissioned spy, among other things." Night glared at him with a rage he didn't know he was capable of. "According to this file, you and your sidekick had orders to kill Midoriya if he was deemed a threat. Orders that I didn't follow, since he's still alive." Hawk shoved his hands into his pockets. It was meant to show that he wasn't a threat, but Night knew he didn't need his hands to fight. "I never had any plans to turn against him. Other than bugging his room, you mean?" Night didn't normally sneer, but he felt the urge to. "Get out, Hawks. I do not trust you around Midoriya anymore." Hawks grimaced, but when almost everyone in the room started looking like they were about to attack him, he wisely retreated from the room. "One thing occurs to me," Nezu said quietly. He was looking at his own phone, reading through the same articles as Night. "It's obvious that the League of Villains, or whatever they call themselves now, are the ones who released this information. I imagine that they did so to cause panic and confusion, as well as mistrust in the government. However, I don't believe they would do something like this for anarchy's sake. There is something else going on." Night-Eye felt a chill go up his spine. The day had been bad enough already. What else were the villains planning? Tartarus was one of the few places in Japan, indeed, in the entire world, not in chaos over recent events. The warden and his top officers were aware, but they instituted a communications blackout for the regular guards. They didn't want to risk the inmates hearing any rumors and starting a riot. Despite assurances from the HPSC that any fighting would be far from the prison, the warden had the guards and heroes assigned as extra security on full alert. When the HPSC went dark, the warden initiated a full lockdown. Steel doors, 3 feet thick and electrified, slammed shut, and prisoners were forced onto their bunks at gunpoint. Anyone who resisted was reminded that their quirk-suppressing collars also had explosives wired into them that could be detonated at any time. Within minutes, the prison already known for being inescapable became even harder to crack. Unfortunately for the guards, Tartarus had one weakness: it might be able to detect a warping quirk, but it couldn't actually prevent it from happening. The guards had less than a minute to react to the portal Kurogiri created before all hell broke loose. Gigantomachia might have been badly injured, but he had enough strength to put his arm through and smash aside anyone in the immediate area. With that breathing room created, the rest of the league charged in. Chimera and Redistro led the way, killing a dozen guards in seconds, followed by Dabi and Slice. 9 was next, and he cut open the first cells he saw. "Come out," he commanded. "My colleague will remove your collars. After that, do as you wish." The first out of her cell was a woman with short purple hair. She raised an eyebrow at the villains. "And who the hell are you?" she asked. Behind his mask, 9 smirked at her audacity. "You may call me 9. I serve the man who will shape the world in his image." "Then why isn't he here now?" "He is," 9 said. "There is someone he wishes to free personally." "Who are you?" The woman shrugged. "Name's Tsutsumi Kaina, used to go by Lady Nagant." Now 9 was impressed. He knew that name, and the skill of the one who owned it. "In that case, would you be interested in joining our cause? Does that cause involve getting rid of all the liars who ruined this country?" 9 thought back to all the chaos unleashed already. "Absolutely." Lady Nagant grinned and allowed Mr. Compressed to get rid of her collar. "Where do I sign up?" "Hello, my old teacher." All for one leaned back in his chair, finally free to move as he wished. "Tamura, it has been a long time. You've grown strong since we last saw each other." "I know." Shigaraki held up one hand. "The doctor's plan, the one you didn't believe in. It worked." "Fascinating." All for one's grin stretched across his face as he lunged for Shigaraki. "What a wonderful power for me to take." Faster than it took to blink, Shigaraki snagged his former master's wrist. An instant later, Overhaul detonated the entire forearm in a wash of blood and bone. "I figured you'd do that," Shigaraki said. "I think we need to change how things will be between us from now on. I'll be the one calling the shots, and you'll be one of my advisors. If you don't take this deal, I kill you right here, and 9 remains my right hand." He paused. Speaking of hands, with another brush of his fingers, Shigaraki restored All for One to the way he had been years ago, thanks to a brief application of rewind. All for One took a moment to appreciate that he was suddenly at the peak of his power once again. "Are you sure that was wise, Tamura? I am now a much greater threat to your power." Shigaraki looked the man in eyes that had been restored and laughed. "No, you're really not." As if to prove his point, he stepped well within the older man's reach. "Let me put it this way, you will never betray me." There was a shiver in the air, and before All for One knew it, he was on his knees. "As you command." He blinked. "How did you? Like I said, you're not a threat to me." Shigaraki glanced down at his arm, which was crumbling away again. "Damn. All right, we're done here. Time to go. What is your next step?" All for One asked, masking his unease behind centuries of experience. "For now, I need time to rest." After that, Shigaraki grinned. "After that, this world will be mine." Lady Nagant did her best to remain composed when she saw All for One, in his prime, casually walking out of his prison, led by a man who looked like he was slowly dissolving, yet was far more powerful than all of them combined. "Gotta say, I wasn't expecting the Demon King himself to be joining us," she said. Shigaraki barely glanced at her, and then turned his attention to 9. A new recruit. Considering her skills, she seemed too valuable to waste, 9 said easily. "Fair enough." Shigaraki pointed to the warp gate. "Move out." "What about the other prisoners?" Nagant asked. "Some of them might also be useful. They will be as a distraction." Shigaraki raised an eyebrow at 9. "The collars were disabled, and they were released, correct?" "Yes." "Then we have everything we need, and then some." Shigaraki smiled at Nagant, but it did nothing to assure her. "Unless you'd rather stay here." Nagant shrugged. "It's not like the food could be worse anywhere else. Let's get out of here." "That's what I thought you'd say." In a flash of green light, Ken returned, But it wasn't a peaceful arrival. He collapsed to the floor, smoking and wheezing. "You okay?" Kevin asked, and got a dirty look in return. "Do I look okay?" Ken struggled to his feet. "Do you guys want the bad news or the worse news?" "Start us off easy," Ben said. "Give us the bad news." "Okay, the bad news is that the Celestial Sapiens aren't going to help out," Ken announced. "As far as they're concerned, this universe isn't their problem, and neither is Shigaraki." "And what if Shigaraki becomes a full Celestial Sapien and makes it their problem?" Julie asked. "That's the worst news." Ken looked as grim as his father. "They almost decided to just erase this universe, but since Izuku was part of the team that stopped the crisis, they're showing mercy by just quarantining this entire universe off from the rest of the multiverse." Supergirl grimaced. "That's mercy. In their eyes, yeah." Ken sighed. "Nobody from this universe can leave, including Shigaraki, and only a Celestial Sapien can change that. They're also kicking out anyone not native to this universe." Azmuth blinked. "Wait, I can't leave yet. There is still work I can do to stabilize Midoriya. Without me, he won't." Before he could finish speaking, Azmuth vanished. Ken's eyes glowed green in an effort to stave off the forced relocation. But everyone not from this universe was already fading. "Remember what we said," Ben called out, his voice sounding like it was coming from the far end of a tunnel. "Shigaraki isn't at full power. You've got a year to find him and end this before it's too late. Tell Izuku to use gray matter." Ken shouted. "He might be able to hack the Omnitrix and find the right alien. Just stay alive," Jen added, though she was all but vanished. "We'll do what we can from our side." And then, just like that, they were gone. Uraraka looked uncertainly at her principal. "What do we do now?" Nezu looked down. "I don't know." The expanded Tennison family was violently thrown into the living room. Most landed on the floor, but Ken was hurled into wall hard enough to crack it. "I think that was another warning from the Celestial Sapiens," he groaned as he got to his feet. "They really didn't like me having unrestricted power, and I'm one of the good guys. We're just lucky they didn't delete Izuku's whole universe. Not to brag, but I believe that my input had something to do with it as well," Paradox said. She was sitting in a chair, sipping a cup of tea. Gwen blinked. "When did you get here?" "I'm a time traveler. That question has no meaning to me." Paradox glanced at her watch and sighed. "Ironic though it may be, I can't stay here for long. There is a lot to do." "Then why are you here?" Ben asked warily. "Not another threat to the multiverse, right?" "There are always threats to the multiverse, but you aren't the ones who have to handle them." Paradox sighed again. "I just wanted to let you know that I paid a visit to Izuku's universe before we were all kicked out to take care of a few matters. Notes, hints, that sort of thing." "Are you even allowed to do that?" Kara asked. Paradox scoffed, and there was a hint of anger in her eyes. "If the Celestial Sapiens have a problem with it, they can take it up with me, but they'll get more of a fight than they would have from my predecessor." Ben sat down and rubbed his face. "Thanks, Paradox. Izuku will need all the help he can get." Paradox nodded solemnly. "Considering what is about to happen, I thought it would be in his best interest." Jen raised an eyebrow. "Wait, what's going to?" And she's gone. "Of course." Julie looked around. "So, what do we do?" "I'm not sure," Ben admitted. "The rest is up to Izuku. This is quite unusual, All Might. Are you sure this is the right course of action?" "I assure you, Prime Minister, I wouldn't ask this of you if I wasn't certain." "But what if you're wrong?" "It would be bad enough if I had the wrong person arrested, a child, no less, but I saw how hard he fought against Shigaraki. Midoriya-san might be our best chance against that maniac, and I'm sure many people agree with me. It could start riots in the streets, assuming everything that's been leaked doesn't do that. Prime Minister, I can assure you that public order will not deteriorate. I am here, and I'm back at the top of my game. You don't have to worry about the public turning against you. I'll show them where to focus their rage." "I see. When can you be ready?" "As soon as you get the arrest warrant pushed through." Midoriya wished he could stay asleep. It helped him forget about all the betrayal and intrigue that had pushed into his life. It also allowed him some respite from the pain he was feeling, especially in his left arm. Unfortunately, something was tapping rather insistently against his cheek, and he finally worked up the energy to open his eyes. "Nezu-sensei, what's wrong?" "I'm sorry, Midoriya-san," Nezu said. "I would have preferred to let you rest as much as possible, but we are out of time." Midoriya froze. "Did the League of Villains make another move?" "Yes, but that's not why I'm here." Nezu held up his phone and nodded at something he read. "I came into some information that has me concerned. I'll explain on the way, but we need to get you out of here as soon as possible." "What about?" "Your friends are not in danger, they will be informed, but if they are told too early, they might be at risk." Nezu pointed to a bag on a chair next to the bed. "Get dressed, and then meet me at the school. Use Ghost Freak to get out undetected, and then Jetre to get to UA as quickly as you can. You'll likely get there before me, so get to my office and stay there. If anyone other than myself comes in, I want you to run. Do you understand me? It wasn't just the directions that had Midoriya scared. His usually unflappable principal seemed genuinely worried. And that was something he'd never seen before. Yes, sir. Good. Nezu hopped off the bed and headed for the door. I'll do what I can to stall for time. Hurry. Once he was gone, Midoriya got dressed. He noticed that Nezu had brought him casual clothes, jeans, a white shirt, a gray hoodie, and gray shoes. All of it was new and nothing he would typically wear. As he put the clothes on, he noticed a pair of sunglasses. He figured that if he had to go in disguise, hiding his eyes would be a smart idea. He took a few deep breaths to calm himself and then turned into Ghost Freak immediately. He noticed that he was no longer in pain, but he didn't have time to dwell on that. He went invisible and floated through the walls until he was outside of the hospital. He then flew as high as he could to avoid any witnesses and turned into Jetray. After getting his bearings, he flew to UA in just a few minutes, though he had to be careful while flying through the pouring rain. He turned back into Ghost Freak and passed through the walls until he arrived inside Nezu's office. Well, this is a lot, Midoriya muttered to himself as he turned back to normal. As soon as he was human, the pain returned, and he started to feel sick. I guess the Omnitrix keeps me in top shape when I'm an alien. He made his way to Nezu's desk to wait, but noticed a tablet that was on, and a note that said, Midoriya-san, please read all open articles. Nezu-sensei really does prepare for everything, doesn't he? Midoriya sat behind the desk and picked up the tablet to read. Some of the bombshells Nezu had left for him were things he already knew. He had pretended to be asleep when Ben had been there, and had heard everything, including how Hawks had betrayed his trust. He'd wanted to cry, but the damage to his eyes seemed to prevent all but a watery sheen. Finding out just how many people had died was a punch to the gut. The death toll was still rising, but there were at least 30,000 fatalities now, and the number was likely to rise. When he read about the attack on Tartarus, he thought his heart would stop, especially when Nezu had left a note about how Chisaki Kai and his top officers had all escaped. Chisaki himself wasn't a threat without his hands, but if his enforcers were still loyal to him, they could be a serious problem. Stain had also escaped, but there was no indication that he'd joined up with the League. If anything, he might not have been associated with them in the first place. Crime was on the rise, with some cities reporting more than a 60% increase in villain activity in the last 24 hours alone. Heroes were trying to contain the situation, but there was surprising resistance to their aid, not just from civilians, but also the police. In several instances, some heroes had been forced to defend themselves from angry citizens, who then formed an impromptu militia to stop several rampaging villains. Worse than the crime, which was mostly centered in Japan, was the shock from learning the true nature of quirks. Some people were turning to religion for answers, while others were forming some kind of blood purity organization, with quirkless people seen as true humans. Mobs had already formed to attack people with mutant-type quirks, just like in the early days of quirks. Unrest was spreading across the globe, and both heroes and law enforcement were scrambling to maintain order. A knock on the door got his attention, and Midoriya activated the Omnitrix, ready to go alien the second he thought he was in danger. Midoriya-san. It's me, Nezu said, and Midoriya relaxed. I'm coming in with guests. A moment later, the door opened, and Nezu walked in, followed by Midnight and Melissa. Midnight tried to look like her usual self, but the death of Eraserhead had hit her hard, and since makeup interfered with her quirk, there was no hiding the puffy eyes from so much crying. Melissa looked haunted, but it couldn't be from the revelations the League had leaked. Midoriya figured she was in shock from all the deaths, and he didn't blame her. Melissa ran in and gave Midoriya a tight hug. I'm sorry I couldn't visit you in the hospital. It's fine, Midoriya said, and returned the hug. How are Mirio, Tamaki, and Nejire? They're with Recovery Girl, Melissa said. They'll be fine, but they're exhausted. Midoriya sighed in relief. He hadn't been able to check on all of his friends since the battle. As much as I'd like to give you time to catch up, that's simply not possible, Nezu said, and hopped onto his desk. Midoriya-san, I'm afraid there's no easy way to say this. There's a warrant out for your arrest. For a moment, Midoriya couldn't quite comprehend what he'd heard. What? All Might has lost his mind. Midnight hissed. She was angry, but not at Midoriya. He's convinced that you're somehow in league with All for One, and he talked the Prime Minister into rushing a warrant through. It's not totally finished, so we've got a few hours to get you out of the country. If Melissa hadn't been holding him, Midoriya might have collapsed. All Might kept calling me a villain during the fight, but I stopped thinking about it after Aizawa-sensei. Nezu nodded sadly. I understand. Midoriya-san, it is my belief that you are our best hope against Shigaraki as he is now. You can't help us if you're locked up, but this choice is up to you. If you do this, you'll be on the run unless another country grants you asylum. And the situation is too chaotic right now. Midoriya thought about it. What about my family, my friends? We can't risk them being labeled as accomplices, Nezu said. If we move fast enough, they might have time to say goodbye. But if I think they'll try to join you, I will stop them. Right? Midoriya agreed. I don't want them to get in trouble. Melissa looked uncomfortable at that, but Nezu kept talking. I've reached out to some international friends and explained the situation. They've agreed to shelter you for now, but you'll have to prove to them that you aren't what All Might says you are. 2 of them will be waiting at the airport to get you out of the country. You'll meet the rest as you travel. Midoriya took a deep breath. This is a lot to handle. I'm not used to doing things like this with strangers, which is why you won't be completely alone, Melissa said. I'm going with you. What? No. Midoriya stepped back. You've only been here for a few months, Melissa. You can't throw away everything for me. Melissa grimaced. I knew that that All Might suspected you a while ago, but I didn't say anything. He's my legal guardian for a few more months, and I can't live with someone who treats you like a criminal. You don't deserve that, and if it means I have to go on the run to prove it, I will. She smiled weakly. Besides, I already talked to Mirko about it, and he said the only reason he isn't joining us is because he wants to work with Sir Night-Eye to slow All Might down. Midoriya could see in her eyes that her mind was made up. What about my parents? Again, the best way to protect them is to keep them in the dark, Nezu said. After you're out of the country, I'll give them my personal protection at UA. No one will hurt them, you have my word. Aniri, Nezu sighed. I'll have to explain things to her. I wish I could let you say goodbye. But All Might convinced her to use her quirk on him, and she's been asleep since yesterday morning. Another reason I can't stay with him, Melissa cut in. How dare he do something so selfish? Midoriya took a moment to consider his options. I can't just run around the world. I want to help stop Shigaraki. You will, Nezu promised. While most of the Paranormal Liberation Front was destroyed, Detnerate has branches all over the planet. They can provide bases and supplies for Shigaraki at any time, especially with Kurogiri to warp the villains anywhere they want. I'm still putting together a plan, but I want you to help take down those locations. If you find anything useful, send it back to me, and I'll handle the rest. That took a tiny bit of weight off Midoriya's shoulders. He didn't want to be a burden, shuffled around from one country to another. Okay, he said. I'm in. Excellent. Nezu nodded at Midnight, who handed Midoriya a familiar case. If you're going to keep being a hero, you should look the part. Midoriya opened the case and saw his costume. He frowned when he saw the visor that Hawks had given him. In a fit of anger, he grabbed the visor and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. I can't believe what he did. If it's any consolation, he genuinely regrets what he did, Nezu said. It's not, Midoriya snapped. Hawks can go to hell, for all I care. He knew my dad was kidnapped. That means that it wasn't him I spoke to on Christmas Eve, it was Toga. He knew, and let him get hurt anyway. I get it, you're mad, Melissa said, and put her hand on his shoulder. But we don't have time for that now. You can punch Hawks later, okay? Midoriya glared at the broken visor for another moment and nodded. Okay, let's get out of here. The drive to the airport felt like an eternity. Along the way, Melissa revealed another reason why she would be going with Midoriya. There was a notebook on my desk that wasn't mine, she said. At first, I thought it was one of your notebooks, but the handwriting is different. Someone named Paradox left a bunch of instructions for me, but didn't want me to show anyone else. They also included a lot of secrets that no one should know, and they said that you would trust anything they said if I dropped their name. Midoriya blinked several times. Yeah, I know her. We can trust her. I'll explain everything when we have more time. Cool, because I was getting a little creeped out that some stranger knew so much about my personal life. Midoriya nodded absently. He wished he had his phone, to at least use that to say goodbye to everyone if they couldn't make it. But Nezu had insisted that his phone be destroyed. He was positive that All Might was having it tracked, even though the warrant still hadn't been signed. After a while, Midoriya couldn't stand his own thoughts and glanced over at Melissa, who was making notes on a tablet. What are you doing? Designing some projects, Melissa said. May is gonna be so mad that she couldn't work on these with me, but I don't want her to get in trouble. And we might get tracked if you tried talking to her. Melissa paused and then smacked her forehead. Right, still getting used to being a fugitive. Midoriya nodded. That tablet isn't connected to the internet, right? Okay, that I didn't forget. Melissa looked out the window. I think we're going to be there soon. The rain was still coming down as the car pulled to a stop. According to Nezu, the weather around Japan had gone crazy, and no one could figure out where the sudden downpour came from, nor when it would stop. Oh, good, it seems they made it on time, Nezu said as he pulled out an umbrella. Izuku took a moment for his eyes to adjust, and then he saw them, standing near a small plane. His parents were first. Inko was holding up an umbrella for both her and Hisashi, who was propped up with crutches. Izuku was hugging his parents before he realized he'd moved. I'm sorry, he sobbed, even though the tears wouldn't fall. I'm sorry, I don't want to leave, but it's okay, honey, Inko said through her own tears. You didn't do anything wrong, and this is the only way to keep you safe. We'll keep fighting for you here, Hisashi said, and did his best to smile. There's no way this crap will hold up in court. Izuku nodded shakily. Thanks, Dad. Inko hugged him again. I wish we could say more, but there are a lot of people who want to say something, and you need to leave soon. Izuku looked around his parents and was swept up in a hug from the big three. Stay safe, flying buddy, Hato said and tapped one of the scars around his eyes. Get better, okay? Don't worry about your friends, Amajiki added, and Nejire smiled proudly at her boyfriend when he maintained a steady gaze with Izuku. We'll make sure they're still here when you get back. One of Tagada's arms was still in a cast, but he managed to give Izuku a back-breaking hug. I won't let All Might get away with this, Izuku. I promise that he won't go after you again. He stepped back, but only so that he could pull Melissa into a deep kiss. Sorry, I just didn't know when I'd be able to do that again. Melissa grinned and kissed him again. Sooner than later, I hope. Izuku couldn't help but laugh when Hato and Amajiki both started making gagging noises, but his smile faded when he saw the rising stars. All of them were crying, or looked like they were about to start. Izuku Tenya awkwardly pulled him into a rough embrace. It was difficult, since he was in a wheelchair because of his broken leg. But neither of them cared. You are my best friend, Izuku. I will never betray your trust, nor your friendship. If you need me while you're away, I will reach you, no matter what it takes. Thanks, Tenya. Izuku swallowed and stepped back. Just make sure everyone keeps their spirits up, okay? You make everyone laugh when you do that hand-chopping thing. Like Tenya, Momo was also in a wheelchair. Even with over a day to restore her lipids, she was still too weak to walk on her own, and her trembling had nothing to do with the cold and rain. She held onto him tightly, like she was worried he would vanish in her arms. Stay safe, Izuku, she whispered, and kissed him on the cheek. You're the reason we came together, and it was the best thing to ever happen to us. Never think otherwise. Izuku nodded. Do you think you'll be able to help me with my homework when I get back? I think I'll have to catch up on a lot. Momo laughed, and then shooed him away. Shoto was next. He was covered in healing burns, but he refused to let that stop him from giving Izuku a hug. Thanks for everything you did for me, he said. When you get back, you'll see that we're strong enough to help you fight Shigaraki. Don't think you have to do this alone. Izuku let go so that Shoto wouldn't put more pressure on his burns. After everything, I never want to be alone. Shoto had barely let go before Mina grabbed Izuku. Unlike her boyfriend, she didn't even try to hide her tears. It's not fair, she sobbed. This is such bullshit. You're a hero, Izuku, and YUSH shouldn't have to run away. Izuku hugged her tightly. When I get back, we can talk about how much this sucks. Until then, can you smile? You're the fun twin, remember? Mina choked on a laugh and hugged him back. Yeah, and that means I've got to plan one hell of a party for when you get back. When Hanta approached, he looked more miserable than Izuku had ever seen him. You know, I'm really bad at living up to my quirk. Every time I try to stick to you, you get pulled away when the League kidnapped you, the raid, and now this. Izuku rubbed his eyes. Between his injuries and his damaged tear ducts, they were getting very sore. Just try to keep everyone else together, okay? You got it, man? Hanta hugged him, and then pointed him at Tsuyu. Unlike everyone else, Tsuyu was unaffected by the rain, but she looked as devastated as Izuku had ever seen her. She opened her mouth several times to speak, but she couldn't get the words out. Izuku hugged her, and she returned it with all the strength she had. I'll miss you, Tsu. She nodded, even as she sobbed into his chest. Can you say ribbit one more time? Izuku joked. I don't think I'll hear it for a while. Tsuyu took a long breath and smiled. Ribbit. Thanks. Even though he didn't feel it, Izuku managed to wink. Don't forget to drive Hanta crazy with that, okay? Deal, Ribbit. As much as he hated saying goodbye to his friends, there was one that Izuku wanted to part with the least. Ochako let her umbrella drop as he slowly approached. He reached out to stroke her hair, and she leaned into his touch. Izuku, I love you. Izuku held her for what felt like the last time. I'm sorry I couldn't say it before, but I love you. Ochako let out a sob and kissed him. They tried to make it last, so that they wouldn't forget the feeling of the other's lips. But they both knew it couldn't last forever, and they finally parted. We won't be gone forever, Midoriya said quietly. We'll be back. You'd better, Ochako said, waving a finger under his nose. And not raising Eri as a single mom. Izuku laughed for a good while. But when he stopped, he looked Ochako in the eye with all the seriousness in the world. I will come back. Ochako nodded. I know, and will be here when you do. As much as he hated to do so, Izuku stepped back and turned to Nezu. I'm ready to go. Nezu smiled. I wish you the best, Midoriya-san. Stay safe and be well. Melissa rubbed her eyes and walked over to Izuku. You sure you're ready? No, Izuku admitted, but if I don't leave now, I don't think I ever will. The door of the plane opened, a ramp slid down, and a man's voice called out. If we're going to leave, we need to do it now. We're running out of excuses for why we haven't left yet. Izuku and Melissa grabbed their bags and hurried up the ramp. Both of them wanted to stop and wave goodbye one more time. But neither of them could stand to see their friends and loved ones crying any longer. Waiting inside the plane were two people, a man and a woman. The man wore a business suit that did nothing to hide his hairy hands and feet, nor the furry tail and simian features on his face. The woman was young, barely in her 20s, and beautiful, with hair so white it almost hurt to look at it. Everything she wore was white, from her skirt to her blouse, and her shoes to her small hat. It all served to give her an unreal, almost ethereal presence. Izuku didn't know their real names, but he knew what they called themselves while they worked. The man was Monkey King, the top hero in China. The woman was Geosync, his counterpart from Russia. Welcome aboard, Monkey King said with a wink and a smile. Take a seat, we've got a long flight ahead of us. Izuku gulped. Even now, after everything he'd been through, he was still a little overwhelmed when meeting prestigious heroes. Where are we going? He managed. Geosync laughed, and her voice was like the tinkle of bells. First, we stop at Island to meet others. Then, we make plan to stop your Shigaraki. Melissa needed a moment to process Geosync's slightly broken Japanese, not helped by her thick Russian accent. What others? Now it was Monkey King who laughed, loud and more like a monkey than a human. What? Did you think you were the only ones breaking the rules to save the world? Don't worry so much, and remember that you're not alone. Izuku sat in a chair and watched as the plane took him away from all but a single person he'd ever known. No, he thought, I won't ever be alone. The rising stars watch as the plane flies away, until it is out of sight. Those who aren't too hurt to walk on their own help those who are. Nezu takes Inko and Hisashi back in his car, but gives them space to cry. Inko closes her eyes, and when she opens them again, she is watching workers take her things into a room in UA. She clutches two photographs close, one of Izuku and one of Holo Ben, and sits next to her husband on the couch. On the nearby television, the news shows a mob of people holding up signs, either with Izuku's face crossed out, or demanding his arrest. The scene changes to Amajiki and Neji are at school, training despite their injuries, and then to Tagata, Sir Night-Eye and Gran Torino in an office. All Might is with them, shouting and pointing, but the three men don't flinch. When All Might is done, they silently turn their backs and leave. All Might smashes the table he is leaning over, scattering papers and photos. When the picture of Midoriya falls to the ground, he glares at it, and everything goes black. The lights turn on, and Hawks is standing in front of several heroes, including Endeavor and Mirko. Next to Hawks is Soldier, who is unconscious on a hospital bed, with several doctors examining her. Hawks gestures from himself to his handler, and the other heroes look on in horror. Despite barely being able to stand, Mirko manages to punch Hawks hard enough to break his nose, and limps out of the room. Hawks waves off a doctor who comes to check on him, and wanders off. He pulls the shattered remains of a green visor out of his jacket pocket and bows his head. The scene changes again, and most of the rising stars are in their homeroom, speaking to both Class 1A and 1B. Some of the students are confused, while others are angry, but they all listen as the rising stars speak. Ida chops at the air as he practically shouts, until Todoroki gently grabs his shoulder. Ashido then speaks, her eyes filled with tears as she gestures from where Aizawa would stand, and then to Midoriya's seat. Finally, Bakugo steps up and nods. A moment later, everyone else does as well, and they all file out of the classroom, and the light turns off behind them. When the light returns, it is to the League of Villains, standing around a map of the world. 9 points at several locations, and then at Kurogiri, who nods. Dabi grins, and Toga cackles as she spins a knife. The rest of the villains either nod or smile, except for All for One. He glances at a door behind him, where Shigaraki is sleeping, his hair flickering between white and a starlit void. The scene switches to Uraraka, sitting in Midoriya's room with Eri. Uraraka reaches out and picks up Midoriya's pillow and holds it close. Eri whimpers and leans into her side. Uraraka hugs her when she starts to cry, and everything fades away to become the plane landing at the island airport. Midoriya steps out of the plane, now in his costume, and shields his eyes from the clear sky. Waiting a short distance from the plane are several of the world's greatest heroes, all watching him with interest. Monkey King and Geosync lead Midoriya and Melissa down the ramp and over to the other heroes. Despite everything, Deku stands tall and looks each of them in the eye. Where do we start? So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 19. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author The Incredible Muffin on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.